Evelyn Hart didn't scream. She'd learned months ago that screaming only brought them faster. Blood from her split lip froze against her cheek as she clawed through waist-deep snow, lungs burning, vision blurring. Behind her, men's voices echoed through the canyon. They were getting closer. Her frozen fingers clutched the leather journal tighter. The only thing between her and a shallow grave. She had nowhere left to run. The blizzard swallowed her whole as she collapsed forward into darkness, certain she'd never wake up again. But someone was watching. Stay with us until the very end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The first thing Ethan Crow noticed was the ravens. They circled overhead in tight, agitated spirals, their calls sharp and insistent against the howling wind. In 15 years of living alone in these mountains, Ethan had learned to read the language of scavengers. Ravens didn't circle like that unless something was dying or already dead. He pulled his fur-lined collar higher and urged his horse forward through the deepening snow. The storm had been building for 2 days now, the kind of blizzard that turned the San Juan Mountains into a frozen hell. Most men would have stayed holed up in their cabins, waiting it out by the fire. But Ethan's traplines didn't check themselves, and the pelts he'd collected over the past week represented the difference between eating and starving come spring. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since morning. Ice crystals hung suspended in the air like broken glass, catching the fading afternoon light. Ethan squinted against the wind, following the raven's trajectory toward a massive snowdrift that had formed against the base of a granite outcropping. That's when he saw the hand. Just the fingertips, really, barely visible above the snow, pale, unmoving, already dusted with fresh powder. "Jesus Christ," Ethan muttered, swinging down from his horse. His boots sank knee-deep as he waded toward the drift. The ravens screamed overhead, angry at being cheated of their meal. He dropped to his knees and started digging, throwing handfuls of snow aside with increasing urgency. A wrist appeared, then a forearm, then a shoulder wrapped in what had once been an expensive wool coat, now torn and filthy. A woman. She was buried face down, her dark hair matted with ice and blood. Ethan's rough hands found her neck, searching for a pulse. For a long moment, he felt nothing but frozen skin. Then, there, faint, barely a flutter. "Come on," he growled, digging faster now. "Come on, damn you. Don't quit on me." He cleared the snow from around her torso and legs, then carefully rolled her over. Her face was deathly pale, lips blue, eyelids crusted with frost. But it was the bruises that made him pause. Dark purple marks around her throat, a split lip, a swollen cheekbone. Someone had hurt her. Recently. Ethan had seen enough violence in his 43 years to recognize the signs. This woman hadn't gotten lost in the mountains by accident. She'd been running from something, or someone. "Probably none of my business," he said aloud, though only his horse was there to hear. Smart thing would be to leave her, let nature take its course. But even as he said it, he was lifting her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, all sharp angles beneath the ruined coat. Her head lolled against his shoulder, breath so shallow he had to press his cheek close to her mouth to confirm she was still alive. The ride back to his cabin took 40 minutes that felt like hours. The storm intensified with every passing minute, wind shrieking through the canyon like something alive and furious. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Ethan trusted his horse to find the way, keeping one arm locked around the woman to prevent her from sliding off the saddle. She didn't wake, didn't move, just lay against him like something already dead, her frozen fingers tangled in his shirt. By the time Ethan's cabin appeared through the wall of white, full darkness had fallen. He half fell off his horse, still clutching the woman, and kicked the door open with his boot. The interior was barely warmer than outside. He'd banked the fire that morning, expecting to be gone most of the day. Now he dumped the woman unceremoniously on the bed and turned to the fireplace, throwing split logs onto the coals with shaking hands. The kindling caught quickly, flames spreading with hungry efficiency. Come on," Ethan muttered, blowing on the fire. Behind him, the woman lay motionless on his bed, probably dying. "Burn, goddammit!" Once the fire was roaring, he turned his attention back to his unexpected guest. Her clothes were soaked through, clinging to her skin like ice. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before beginning to strip them off. Modesty was a luxury neither of them could afford right now. Hypothermia didn't give a damn about propriety. The coat came off first, revealing a dress that had once been fine but was now shredded and stained. As Ethan worked the buttons free, something fell from the inner pocket and hit the floor with a thud. A leather journal. Small, unmarked, bound with a brass clasp. Ethan picked it up, turned it over in his hands. Heavy for its size. The leather was good quality, expensive. He flipped it open and immediately regretted it. Page after page of dense handwriting. Names, numbers, dates. None of it meant anything to him, but the way it was organized, like a ledger, like records someone wanted to keep hidden, made his gut clench. This woman wasn't just running, she was carrying something dangerous. Definitely not my business, Ethan said, tossing the journal onto his table. Definitely should have left you in that snowdrift. But he kept working, peeling away the wet layers until she was down to her undergarments. That's when he saw the full extent of the bruises. They covered her ribs, her shoulders, her upper arms. Dark, vicious marks that spoke of sustained violence. Someone had beaten her, more than once. Ethan felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. Rage. The kind he'd spent 15 years trying to bury up here in the mountains, away from people, away from the reasons he'd become the man he was. He grabbed every blanket he owned and piled them on top of her, then dragged the bed closer to the fireplace. Her skin was still ice cold to the touch, her breathing so shallow he had to keep checking to make sure she hadn't stopped. "You picked a hell of a place to die," he told her, settling into the chair beside the bed. "Most folks have the decency to do it somewhere civilized. But you had to go and make it my problem." Outside, the blizzard hammered against the cabin walls. Snow piled up against the windows, sealing them in. Ethan stared at the woman's pale face and wondered who she was, what she'd done, who she'd angered badly enough to end up beaten and left to freeze in the highest, most remote corner of the Colorado Rockies. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and somewhere deep in the woman's chest, her heart kept beating. Barely. The fever hit around midnight. Ethan had dozed off in his chair, exhausted from the day's ride and the adrenaline crash that followed. He woke to the sound of thrashing. The woman was fighting against the blankets, her head whipping back and forth, eyes still closed but mouth moving in frantic, wordless pleas. "No," she gasped. "No, please. I won't." Ethan was on his feet instantly, grabbing her shoulders to keep her from throwing herself off the bed. Her skin was burning now, the hypothermia giving way to a raging fever that had her whole body shaking. "Easy," he said, trying to gentle his voice. It had been years since he'd spoken to another person with anything resembling kindness, and the word came out rough, almost angry. "Easy now. You're safe." Her eyes snapped open, wide, terrified, completely unfocused. She stared right through him, seeing something that wasn't there. "Don't tell him," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please. He'll kill me. He'll kill everyone." "Nobody's killing anyone," Ethan said firmly. "You hear me? You're in my cabin. You're safe here." But she wasn't listening. The fever had her trapped in some nightmare she couldn't escape. She tried to sit up, still fighting, and Ethan had no choice but to hold her down, his hands on her shoulders, his face inches from hers. "Listen to me," he said, sharper now. "You need to calm down. You're going to hurt yourself." For just a moment, her eyes seemed to focus on his face. She went very still, staring up at him with an expression he couldn't read. Fear, maybe, or recognition, or both. Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp. Ethan caught her before her head hit the headboard, easing her back down onto the pillows. Her pulse was racing, skin slick with sweat despite the chills that racked her body. He'd seen enough fever in his life to know this was bad. Infection, probably, from exposure and whatever injuries she'd sustained before ending up in that snowdrift. He spent the rest of the night alternating between cooling her down with wet cloths and piling blankets back on when the chills returned. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling words he couldn't make out, other times lying so still he had to check her breathing. Dawn came gray and bitter. The storm hadn't let up at all. If anything, it had intensified. Snow was piled 3 feet high against the cabin door. The windows were completely blocked. They weren't going anywhere for days, maybe weeks. Ethan looked at the woman in his bed, flushed with fever, bruised, carrying secrets that had nearly gotten her killed, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. The same weight he'd spent 15 years in these mountains trying to escape. "You better not die," he told her quietly. "I didn't drag your half-frozen ass out of that drift just so you could die in my bed." She didn't answer, just lay there breathing, fighting whatever battles were raging inside her own body. Ethan stood, stretched his stiff back, and went to make coffee. It was going to be a long day, probably a long week. He glanced at the leather journal still sitting on his table, then deliberately looked away. Not his business, not his problem. He'd keep her alive, wait out the storm, then send her on her way. Whatever trouble she was running from could stay her trouble. He'd had enough of other people's wars to last him 3 lifetimes. The coffee was bitter and strong, the way he liked it. Ethan drank it standing at the window, staring out at the wall of white that had swallowed the world whole. Somewhere out there, beyond the storm, were the people who'd done this to her, the ones she'd been running from. Let them come, Ethan thought darkly. Let them try to find this place in a blizzard. He was halfway through his second cup when he heard her voice, weak and hoarse. "Where am I?" Ethan turned. The woman was awake, propped up on one elbow, staring at him with eyes that were clearer than they had any right to be after the night she'd had. They were blue, he noticed, dark blue, like deep water. "You're in my cabin," Ethan said. "About 8 miles up from the valley floor, found you buried in a snowdrift yesterday." She looked down at herself, at the blankets, at her bare arms, at the bruises she couldn't hide. Something flickered across her face. Shame, maybe, or fear. "My clothes," she said, "were soaked through. You would have frozen to death." Ethan kept his voice flat, matter-of-fact. "They're drying by the fire." She pulled the blankets higher, a defensive gesture that made her wince. Broken ribs, probably, or at least bruised. "How long have I been here?" "About 12 hours. You've been running a fever most of the night." Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "You got a name?" The woman hesitated. It was a small thing, barely a pause, but Ethan caught it. She was deciding how much to tell him, whether to trust him at all. "Evelyn," she said finally. "Evelyn Hart. That your real name?" Another pause, then a faint, bitter smile. "Does it matter?" "Suppose not." Ethan gestured toward the window. "Storm's still going strong. We're snowed in for at least a week, maybe longer. So whatever you're running from, they're not finding you here anytime soon." Evelyn's eyes went to the window, then to the door, then back to Ethan. Calculating. Looking for exits. Looking for threats. "I'm not running from anything," she said. "Sure you're not." Ethan pushed off the wall. "That's why you were half dead in a blizzard 20 miles from the nearest town. That's why you're covered in bruises. That's why you got that ledger hidden in your coat pocket." Her face went white. "You looked through my things?" "Fell out when I was getting you out of your wet clothes. Didn't read it." Ethan met her eyes steadily. "Don't care what's in it. None of my business." "Then why mention it?" "Because whoever gave you those bruises is probably looking for it. And when this storm clears, they're going to keep looking. So you can lie to me all you want, Evelyn Hart or whatever your real name is, but don't lie to yourself. You're in trouble. Bad trouble. And you dragged it into my mountains." Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, she lay back down, turning her face toward the wall. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," she whispered. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He recognized that tone, that exhaustion, the sound of someone who'd run until they couldn't run anymore, who'd fought until they had nothing left to fight with. "Well," he said gruffly, "you're here now. Might as well rest while you can." He turned back to the window, giving her privacy. Behind him, he heard her breathing even out, slipping back toward sleep. The fever would return. It always did. But for now, she could rest. Outside, the blizzard raged on. 3 days passed before Evelyn was strong enough to stand on her own. They fell into an uneasy routine. Ethan would wake before dawn, feed the fire, check his trap lines when the weather allowed. Evelyn would sleep, wake to eat the simple meals he prepared, then sleep again. They spoke little. Ethan wasn't much for conversation, and Evelyn seemed to prefer silence. But he watched her. Couldn't help it. The way she flinched whenever he moved too quickly. The way her eyes tracked every sound, every shadow. The way she positioned herself in bed so she could see both the door and the window at all times. She was terrified, trying to hide it, doing a decent job, But Ethan had spent too many years reading people in high-stakes situations to miss the signs. On the fourth morning, he woke to find her standing at the window, wrapped in one of his blankets, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. "Storm finally broke," Ethan said from the doorway. Evelyn didn't turn around. "How long until the pass is clear?" "Week, maybe 2, snow's deep this year." "And the town? The mining settlement down in the valley? What about it? How often do you go there?" Ethan studied her profile. She was thin, too thin, her face all sharp angles and hollow places. Pretty, once upon a time. Might be again if she ever stopped looking hunted. "Once a month, usually. Get supplies, sell pelts, trade for coffee and ammunition." "When's the next trip?" "Whenever I damn well feel like it." Ethan crossed his arms. "Why? You planning to leave?" Evelyn's reflection in the window showed him a bitter smile. "Would you stop me?" "No." "Then why do you care?" "Don't." Ethan turned away, busying himself with the fire. "But you won't make it 5 miles in your condition. Lose your way, freeze to death, and I'll have wasted a week keeping you alive for nothing." "Always so charming in the mornings?" "I'm not charming any time of day. You want charming? You're in the wrong cabin." Behind him, Evelyn laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, more surprise than humor. "Fair enough." She moved away from the window, settling carefully into the chair by the fire. Her movements were still stiff, painful. The bruises were fading to yellow and green, but the broken rib would take weeks to fully heal. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for pulling me out of that drift, for taking care of me. I know you didn't have to." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Couldn't very well leave you to die." "Most men would have." "Well, I'm not most men." "No," Evelyn said, studying him with those unsettling blue eyes. "I don't suppose you are." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire crack and pop. Outside, birds were starting to return, their calls echoing across the valley. The world was waking up after the storm. "The ledger," Evelyn said suddenly. "The journal you found. I need it back." Ethan gestured toward the table. "Never took it. It's right there." She stood wincing and retrieved it, held it against her chest like something precious or dangerous. "It's evidence," she said, "of crimes, terrible crimes. Murder, extortion, fraud. If the right people see it, it could bring down some very powerful men. And if the wrong people get their hands on it, they'll destroy it, and me along with it." Ethan poured himself more coffee, considering. "So let me guess. You stole this from someone rich, someone who doesn't like losing things. And now they've got men hunting you across half of Colorado." "That's about the size of it." "You're an idiot." Evelyn's eyes flashed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me? You're an idiot. Whatever's in that book, whatever you think it's not worth your life. Hand it over, disappear, and save yourself the trouble." "It's not that simple." "It never is." Ethan sat down across from her. "But you want my advice. Burn that thing. Forget you ever saw it. Go somewhere far away and start over, because the kind of men who beat women half to death and leave them to freeze, they don't quit, they don't forgive, and they don't stop until they get what they want." "I know." Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "I know exactly what kind of men they are. That's why I can't let them win." She looked up, and Ethan saw something in her eyes that made him pause. Not fear. Not anymore. Something harder, colder. "They killed a woman," Evelyn said. "A girl, really. 19 years old. She worked in one of their hotels, cleaning rooms. She saw something she wasn't supposed to see, and they killed her. Made it look like suicide. Her name was Margaret. She was my friend." Ethan said nothing. "There are others," Evelyn continued. "So many others. Workers who asked for better wages, journalists who asked too many questions, businessmen who wouldn't sell their land, all of them dead or disappeared. And nobody does anything because the men responsible are too rich, too connected, too powerful." "So you decided to be the hero." Ethan's tone was flat. "Steal their secrets, expose their crimes, bring them to justice." "Someone had to." "And look where it got you. Beaten, hunted, nearly frozen to death in the mountains." Ethan leaned forward. "You want justice? Fine. But you're going about it the wrong way. Men like that don't fall because someone steals a ledger. They fall because the right people decide it's in their interest to make them fall. And if you're not careful, you'll just end up dead alongside all those other people who tried to do the right thing. Evelyn's jaw clenched. So what do you suggest? That I do nothing? Let them get away with murder? I suggest you survive, that's all. Survive long enough to figure out a plan that doesn't end with you buried in an unmarked grave. They stared at each other across the table. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows across the rough cabin walls. You don't care, Evelyn said finally, about justice, about what's right. No, Ethan agreed. I don't. Learned a long time ago that caring gets you nothing but pain. That's a sad way to live. It's a smart way to stay alive. Evelyn stood, still clutching the ledger. Then, I suppose we have nothing more to discuss. She walked back to the bed and lay down, turning her face toward the wall. Conversation over. Ethan sat alone by the fire, drinking his coffee, trying not to think about dead girls named Margaret, or the cold certainty in Evelyn's eyes when she'd talked about bringing down powerful men. Not his problem, he reminded himself, not his fight, but as he stared into the flames, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that he'd just lied to them both. A week passed, then another. The snow began to melt, slowly but surely. Streams of water ran down the mountainside, carving new paths through the drifts. The days grew longer, the sun stronger. Spring was still months away, but winter was loosening its grip, degree by painful degree. Evelyn healed, the bruises faded. Her movements became steadier, less painful. She started helping around the cabin, cooking, cleaning, mending his worn clothes with a skill that surprised him. They spoke more, though never about anything important. Weather, food, the ravens that circled overhead. Ethan caught himself watching her sometimes. The way firelight caught in her dark hair. The way she smiled, rare and brief, when something amused her. The way her hands moved, quick and capable, as she worked. It had been a long time since he'd shared his space with another person. Longer still, since that person had been a woman. He'd forgotten what it was like. The small shifts in routine, the awareness of another presence, another heartbeat in the silence. He didn't like it. Didn't like how comfortable it was starting to feel. I need to go to town, he announced one morning. Supplies are getting low. Evelyn looked up from the shirt she was mending. When? Tomorrow, probably. Be gone 2, maybe 3 days. Something flickered across her face. Fear, quickly hidden. You're leaving me here alone? You're healed enough, you'll be fine. What if someone comes? Nobody knows you're here? Nobody's going to come. But even as he said it, Ethan felt uneasy. The bounty hunters Evelyn had mentioned, if they existed, if they were still looking, would they have given up by now? Or would they keep searching, methodical and patient, until they found her? I'll be quick, he said. 3 days at most. There's food, firewood, ammunition if you need it. Just stay inside, keep the door barred, and you'll be fine. Evelyn nodded slowly, but her hands had stilled on the shirt, and when she looked at him, her eyes were dark with worry. Ethan, she said, if something happened to you out there, if you didn't come back, what should I do? I'll come back. But if you didn't, I will. He said it firmly, with more certainty than he felt. I always do. Bulk. The ride down to the mining town took most of a day. Ethan pushed his horse hard, eager to get the trip over with. The whole way down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a mistake, that he shouldn't have left Evelyn alone, that something was going to go wrong. The town, if you could even call it that, consisted of about 30 buildings clustered around a played-out silver mine. Rough men living rough lives, drinking away their wages in the 3 saloons that somehow managed to stay in business despite the mine's dwindling yields. Ethan tied his horse outside the general store and went inside. The owner, a grizzled man named Patterson, looked up from behind the counter. Crow, didn't expect to see you this time of year. Needed supplies. Ethan handed over his list. Can you fill this? Probably. Might take a day or 2. You staying in town? No, I'll wait. Patterson grunted and disappeared into the back. Ethan stood at the counter, listening to the sounds of the town filtering through the walls. Horses, voices, the distant clang of the stamp mill still processing ore from the deeper shafts. That's when he heard the conversation from the saloon next door, offering good money, real good, 500 in gold for information, 1,000 for the woman herself. Ethan went very still. 500? Another voice, skeptical. For some runaway thief? What'd she steal? The crown jewels? Don't know, don't care. But the man offering the bounty is serious, got hunters working every town from Denver to Durango. They'll find her eventually. If she's even still alive. Been what, 2 months, woman like that? Alone in these mountains in winter? She's probably frozen in a drift somewhere. Maybe. But they're still looking, and they're paying cash, friend. Real cash, not scrip. Ethan's hand tightened on the counter. He forced himself to stay calm, to keep his expression neutral. Just another mountain man picking up supplies. Nothing to see here. Patterson emerged with a crate. Got most of what you need. Have to order the rest from the warehouse in Silverton. Take about a week. That's fine. Ethan's voice was steady. I'll pick it up next time. He paid, loaded the crate onto his horse, and rode out of town without looking back. But his mind was racing. 500 in gold for information. 1,000 for Evelyn herself. That was serious money. The kind of money that made men do stupid, dangerous things. The kind of money that turned neighbors into bounty hunters and friends into traitors. And if the hunters were working every town from Denver to Durango, it was only a matter of time before they reached the San Juan Mountains, before they started asking questions, before someone remembered seeing Ethan, the reclusive mountain man who never came to town except for supplies, before they came looking. Ethan rode through the night, pushing his horse harder than he should have, driven by a growing sense of urgency he couldn't quite explain. By the time he reached his cabin, dawn was breaking over the peaks, painting the snow gold and pink. He dismounted and pushed through the door, and found Evelyn standing by the window, rifle in her hands, pointed directly at his chest. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Evelyn lowered the gun, her whole body sagging with relief. Sorry, I heard someone coming. I thought, it's fine. Ethan kicked the door closed behind him. Smart to be careful. He set down the supply crate and looked at her, really looked, at the fear still lingering in her eyes, at the way her hands trembled slightly as she set down the rifle, at the pale, drawn expression that said she'd barely slept since he'd left. They're still looking for you, he said, offering bounties. Serious money, 500 in gold just for information about where you are. Evelyn went very still. How much do they want for me? 1,000. She laughed, a hollow sound. I'm flattered. I didn't think I was worth that much. This isn't funny, Evelyn. Men are going to come looking. Maybe not today, maybe not next week. But eventually someone's going to put it together. Someone's going to remember seeing me, wonder why I'm buying extra supplies, decide to take a ride up here and check. Then I'll leave. Evelyn straightened, squaring her shoulders. I never meant to put you in danger. I'll go. Find somewhere else to hide. You won't last a week out there alone. Then I'll die trying. Better than getting you killed for harboring me. Nobody's dying, Ethan said sharply. And nobody's leaving. Not yet. Evelyn stared at him. Why are you doing this? You said it yourself. You don't care about justice, about what's right. So why risk your life for a stranger? Ethan didn't have a good answer for that. Or maybe he did, but he wasn't ready to admit it. Not to her, not to himself. Because I pulled you out of that snowdrift, he said finally, and I don't do things halfway. If I'm going to save your life, I'm going to do it right. Evelyn's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, maybe. But Ethan wasn't lying. He'd meant every word, even if he didn't fully understand why. Okay, she said softly. Okay. So what do we do? Ethan walked to the window, staring out at the mountains that had been his sanctuary for 15 years. His fortress, his prison. We prepare, he said, because when they come, and they will come, we're going to be ready. The preparation started that same afternoon. Ethan walked the perimeter of his property, with Evelyn trailing behind him, pointing out the natural choke points where the forest met the clearing. The cabin sat on a small plateau, backed against a sheer granite cliff that made approach from behind impossible. Anyone coming would have to come from the front or the sides, through terrain Ethan knew, like the lines on his own hands. This trail here, he said, stopping at a narrow path that wound through a stand of pines. It's the easiest approach from the valley. Most men would take it without thinking. Most men, Evelyn repeated. But not all? Smart ones might circle around, come at us from the east through the boulder field. It's harder going, but provides better cover. Ethan kicked at the snow, revealing frozen ground beneath. We'll need to account for both. Evelyn hugged her coat tighter against the wind. Her face was pale. Whether from cold or fear, Ethan couldn't tell. You really think they'll come all the way up here? For 1,000 in gold? Yeah, I think they'll come. They spent the rest of the day marking positions, calculating sight lines, identifying places where a man could hide or where the terrain could be used to advantage. Ethan worked methodically, drawing on skills he'd tried hard to forget. Skills learned in a different life, a different war, when he'd been someone else entirely. By the time they returned to the cabin, dusk was settling over the mountains. Evelyn's teeth were chattering despite her coat, and Ethan noticed she was limping slightly. Too much walking, too soon. The broken rib was still healing. Sit, he ordered, gesturing to the chair by the fire. You overdid it. I'm fine. You're limping. I said I'm fine. But she sat anyway, wincing as she lowered herself into the chair. Ethan busied himself with dinner. Salt pork, beans, the last of the potatoes from his root cellar. Simple food, but filling. He cooked in silence, aware of Evelyn watching him from across the room. You were a soldier, she said suddenly. Weren't you? Ethan's hand stilled on the knife. What makes you say that? The way you move. The way you look at terrain. You're not just some mountain hermit who knows how to hunt. She paused. You've fought before. Real fights. Not just bar brawls. Maybe I have. Which war? Does it matter? I suppose not. Evelyn shifted in her chair, trying to find a comfortable position. But it explains some things. Why you're up here alone, why you don't go to town unless you have to, why you're so what? Careful. Like you're always expecting something bad to happen. Ethan turned back to the stove. In my experience, expecting the worst means you're rarely disappointed. That's a terrible way to live. You already told me that. Doesn't make it less true. They ate in silence after that. The fire crackled and popped, filling the spaces between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Another storm was coming. Ethan could feel it in his bones. Not as bad as the last one, but enough to make things difficult. Tell me about them, Ethan said finally. The men hunting you. I need to know what we're up against. Evelyn set down her fork. Her expression went carefully blank, the way it always did when she talked about her past. What do you want to know? Everything. Start with who you stole that ledger from. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to the table, and retrieved the leather journal, held it in her hands like something that might bite. His name is Lawrence Ashton, she said. He owns the Colorado Mountain Railroad Company. Also half the silver mines in the territory, 3 newspapers, and about 40,000 acres of land from here to the Utah border. Rich, then. Rich doesn't begin to cover it. The man has senators in his pocket, judges, sheriffs. Anyone who matters between here and Denver, he either owns or controls. Evelyn opened the ledger, her fingers tracing the lines of text. This book documents everything. Bribes paid to government officials, land seized through intimidation and murder, workers killed in accidents that were anything but accidental. And that's just the first 50 pages. Ethan leaned back in his chair. And you worked for him? I was his secretary for 3 years. He trusted me to keep his schedules, manage his correspondence, organize his files. Her laugh was bitter. He trusted me because I was quiet and efficient and I knew my place. Just another woman grateful for steady employment. But you weren't grateful. Not after I realized what kind of man he was. Not after Margaret. Evelyn's voice cracked slightly on the name. She was a housemaid in his Denver mansion, 19 years old, sweet girl, always smiling. One night she was cleaning Ashton's study when he was meeting with some associates. She overheard them planning. Evelyn stopped, swallowed hard. Planning what? Ethan prompted. A massacre. There's a settlement of homesteaders about 60 miles east of Denver. Families who've been farming that land for 20 years. Ashton wants it for a railroad spur, but they won't sell. So he was arranging for them to be killed. Made to look like an Indian raid, even though there hasn't been real trouble with the tribes in that area for years. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. And Margaret? She tried to warn them, sent a letter to one of the families. Ashton found out. Evelyn's hands tightened on the ledger. They found her 3 days later hanging in her room, ruled it a suicide. But I saw her body before they took her away. The bruises on her throat were wrong for hanging. Someone strangled her first, then staged the scene. You're sure? I'm sure. I grew up on a farm, Mr. Crow. I've seen men hang themselves in barns when the crops failed and the bank came calling. I know what it looks like. She met his eyes. That wasn't it. Ethan rubbed his jaw, processing. Lawrence Ashton. The name was vaguely familiar. He'd seen it in newspapers during his infrequent trips to town. One of those titans of industry the papers loved to write about, building railroads and empires while crushing anyone who got in their way. So you stole his ledger, Ethan said. What was the plan? Take it to the authorities? That was the idea. Federal marshals, maybe a prosecutor brave enough to take on someone like Ashton. Evelyn set the book down. But I didn't get that far. He discovered the theft within hours. Had men waiting at the train station, the stagecoach office, every way out of Denver. I barely escaped with my life. How'd you end up in the mountains? I ran, kept running, bought a horse in a town called Sterling, rode west until the animal went lame, sold what jewelry I had for supplies and kept going on foot. I thought, she laughed shakily, I thought if I could just make it far enough, high enough, somewhere remote enough, they'd give up, that I'd be safe. Nobody's safe if they're determined enough, Ethan said. And for 1,000 in gold, they're plenty determined. Evelyn sank back into her chair. In the firelight, she looked exhausted, defeated. I know I've failed, that I'm going to die up here, and that ledger is going to burn with me, and Ashton is going to keep destroying lives without consequence. Hey, Ethan's voice came out sharper than he intended. I didn't say we were giving up. Then what are we doing? We're preparing, like I told you, and when they come, we're going to make them regret it. Evelyn stared at him. Why? Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. You could turn me in yourself, collect that 1,000 in gold, and spend the rest of your life comfortable. Could, Ethan agreed, but I won't. Why not? He didn't have a good answer, or maybe he had too many answers, all tangled up with memories he'd spent 15 years trying to bury. Dead soldiers in muddy fields, a burning farmhouse, a woman's scream cut short. Because I've seen what men like Ashton do, he said finally, and I'm tired of letting them win. Something shifted in Evelyn's expression, a crack in the careful walls she'd built around herself. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan stood abruptly, uncomfortable with the gratitude, with the weight of what he'd just committed to. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start real training. If you're going to survive what's coming, you need to know how to shoot properly. I can shoot. Can you hit what you're aiming at? Evelyn's silence was answer enough. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Ethan woke before sunrise, as he always did, and started coffee while Evelyn still slept. He stood at the window, watching the sky lighten behind the peaks, and tried to remember the last time he'd cared this much about keeping someone alive. Couldn't recall. Must have been a long time ago, before the war, before everything went to hell. Morning, Evelyn said from behind him. She'd wrapped herself in a blanket, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Without the constant fear tightening her features, she looked younger. Maybe 30, maybe less. Coffee's ready, Ethan said. They drank in silence, watching the day arrive. When they'd finished, Ethan retrieved 2 rifles from the rack on the wall and handed one to Evelyn. Let's see what you can do. He set up targets in the clearing, chunks of wood balanced on rocks at varying distances. Started Evelyn at 20 yards with the rifle, watched as she checked the chamber, settled the stock against her shoulder. Breathe, he instructed. Don't hold it. Just let it out natural and squeeze the trigger between heartbeats. Evelyn fired. The shot went wide, kicking up snow 3 feet to the left of the target. You're jerking the trigger, Ethan said, and you're tensing up right before you shoot. Try again. She did. Better this time, but still a miss. Again. Miss. Again. This time the bullet clipped the edge of the wood, sending splinters flying. Evelyn lowered the rifle, frustrated. I'm terrible at this. You're learning. There's a difference. Ethan moved behind her, adjusting her stance. Feet shoulder width. Don't lean back, that's why your shots are pulling left. And relax your shoulders. You're wound tighter than a watch spring. Someone's trying to kill me. It's hard to relax. If you can't relax under pressure, you're useless in a fight. Ethan stepped back. Try again. Evelyn fired, hit the target dead center. There, Ethan said. Now do it again. They spent the next 2 hours practicing. Rifle first, then pistol, then back to rifle at longer distances. Evelyn improved steadily, her natural coordination overcoming her lack of experience. By noon, her shoulder was bruised from the recoil and her hands were shaking, but she could hit a man-sized target at 50 yards more often than not. Enough, Ethan said finally. Any more, and you won't be able to lift your arms tomorrow. They walked back to the cabin. Evelyn was quiet, thoughtful. What you said before, she began, about seeing what men like Ashton do. What did you mean? Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then, the war, the one you asked about, I fought in it, did things I'm not proud of, saw things that still wake me up at night. Which side? Does it matter? Both sides did terrible things. Both sides thought they were right. And when it was over, the men who started it all, the politicians, the generals, the wealthy bastards who profited from the whole mess, they walked away clean while the rest of us tried to put ourselves back together from whatever pieces were left. They reached the cabin. Ethan paused at the door. After it ended, I tried to go home. But home wasn't there anymore. Nothing was there anymore. So I came here. Figured if I went high enough, far enough, I could leave all that behind. Did it work? For a while. Then you showed up. Evelyn touched his arm, just briefly, just a brush of her fingers against his sleeve. I'm sorry. Don't be. Maybe I needed to stop hiding. Ethan pushed open the door. Besides, we're not beaten yet. Over the following days, they fell into a new routine. Mornings were for training, shooting, reloading under pressure, maintaining weapons in cold conditions. Afternoons were for preparation, stockpiling ammunition, reinforcing the cabin's defenses, setting traps along the approach trails. Ethan showed Evelyn how to rig a snare that would catch a man's leg and hoist him into the air, how to position loose rocks so they'd avalanche down on anyone climbing the slope, how to dig snow pits and cover them with branches that would collapse under a man's weight. You're turning this mountain into a death trap, Evelyn observed. That's the idea. The longer we can keep them at a distance, the better our chances. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire, and Evelyn would tell him more about Lawrence Ashton's empire. The railroad deals that weren't quite legal. The mines where workers died in suspicious cave-ins. The politicians who'd voted exactly the way Ashton wanted after receiving generous campaign contributions. It's all in the ledger, she said. Names, dates, amounts. Enough to bring down half the territorial government if it reached the right people. Big if, Ethan said. I know, but I have to try. Margaret deserves that much. They all do. Ethan watched her face in the firelight, saw the determination there, the anger, the grief. Evelyn Hart might have started out as some rich man's secretary, but somewhere along the way she'd become something harder, something that wouldn't break easily. You really think you can win this? He asked. I think I have to try. Otherwise, what was the point of any of it? Sometimes there isn't a point. Sometimes things just happen and there's no meaning to find. I don't believe that. That's because you still have hope. Give it time. Evelyn smiled, sad and knowing. Is that what happened to you? You ran out of hope? Something like that. Well, she stood, stretching. Maybe I have enough for both of us. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. The weather warmed slightly, turning the snow to slush during the day before it refroze at night. Ethan made another trip to town for supplies, returning with unsettling news. More hunters showed up, he told Evelyn. Professional types. Well armed. They're asking questions, showing a sketch. A sketch of me. Yeah. Good likeness, too. Someone who knew you must have described you in detail. Evelyn's face went pale. Did anyone recognize it? Not that I heard, but they're getting closer, working their way through every settlement, every mining camp, every trapper's cabin between here and the valley floor. How long until they reach us? Ethan did the math in his head. Week. Maybe less if they push hard. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Ethan found her standing at the window again, staring out into the darkness. You should rest, he said. Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see them coming, see myself dying in the snow like Margaret. You're not going to die. You can't promise that. No, Ethan admitted. But I can promise I'll do everything in my power to prevent it. Evelyn turned to face him. Why? I still don't understand why you're risking so much for me. Because you remind me I'm still human, Ethan thought. Because you made me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond mere survival. Because for the first time in 15 years, I have a reason to get up in the morning beyond just not dying. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, because it's the right thing to do. You told me you didn't care about what's right. Maybe I lied. Evelyn stepped closer. They were standing very near each other now, close enough that Ethan could smell the wood smoke in her hair, see the flecks of gold in her blue eyes. Ethan, she said softly, if we survive this— When? He corrected. When we survive this. When we survive this, Evelyn continued, I want you to know that you saved my life. Not just by pulling me out of that snowdrift. You saved me from giving up, from believing that nothing good existed in this world anymore. Ethan's throat felt tight. Don't make me into something I'm not. I'm no hero. Maybe not, but you're a good man, whether you want to admit it or not. She rose up on her toes and kissed his cheek, just briefly, just a whisper of warmth against his scarred skin. Then she stepped back and returned to bed, leaving Ethan standing alone by the window, one hand pressed to where her lips had been. The attack came 4 days later. Ethan was outside checking his traps when he spotted movement in the trees below. 3 men, maybe 4, working their way up the mountain with the careful precision of experienced hunters. They were still a mile out, moving slowly, checking every approach. He was back at the cabin in minutes. They're here. 4 men, coming up the eastern trail. Evelyn's face went white, but her hand stayed steady as she checked her pistol. What do we do? First trap is about half a mile down. If they're smart, they'll spot it and go around. If they're not— Ethan grabbed his rifle. Either way, we'll know they're coming. They waited. 15 minutes. 20. Then they heard it. A man's scream, sharp and sudden, cut off almost immediately. One down, Ethan said grimly. That was the leg snare. Should we go check? No, his friends will free him or leave him. Either way, they know we're expecting them now. He was right. For the next hour, nothing moved. The hunters had gone to ground, probably regrouping, probably trying to figure out how many people they were facing and what kind of defenses they'd encountered. Ethan used the time to get Evelyn into position, the second floor of the cabin, where she had clear sight lines on the approaches from both the front and side. He gave her the rifle with the best scope, made sure she had plenty of ammunition. You see anyone who's not me, you shoot, he said. Don't hesitate, don't give warnings, just shoot. Where will you be? Out there. Moving. They're expecting us to hole up and defend the cabin, so I'm going to go hunting instead. Ethan, that's the smart play. Trust me. He slipped out the back window before she could argue, using the cliff face as cover as he worked his way around to the eastern approach. The snow was deep enough to muffle his footsteps, and years of living in these mountains had taught him how to move without leaving obvious tracks. He found the first hunter crouched behind a boulder about 300 yards from the cabin. The man was young, maybe 25, with a scarred face and expensive rifle. He was watching the cabin intently, probably waiting for a signal from his companions. Ethan shot him through the throat. The man went down without a sound, blood spreading across the white snow in a dark stain. Ethan didn't feel anything, no guilt, no satisfaction, just cold calculation. 3 left. He moved on, circling wider, found the second hunter trying to flank from the north. This one was older, more experienced, moving with the careful precision of a man who'd done this before. Too bad experience only got you so far. Ethan waited until the hunter stepped into one of his snow pits, then shot him twice in the chest as he struggled to climb out. 2 down, 2 to go. Gunfire erupted from the cabin. Evelyn had spotted one of the remaining hunters. Ethan heard her rifle crack once, twice, then silence. Either she'd hit her target or driven him to cover. He worked his way back toward the cabin, moving fast now. Speed mattered more than stealth at this point. The hunters knew they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. They'd either retreat or make a desperate push. A bullet whined past Ethan's head close enough to feel the heat. He dove behind a tree as a second shot splintered bark inches from his face. There. Muzzle flash from a cluster of rocks to his left. The third hunter, better positioned than the others, with a clear shot at both Ethan and the cabin. Ethan returned fire, forcing the hunter to duck, then broke cover and ran. Bullets kicked up snow around his feet, but he kept moving, zigzagging, making himself a difficult target. He reached the rocks and came around the side just as the hunter was reloading. They stared at each other for a frozen moment. The hunter was middle-aged, hard-faced, with the cold eyes of a man who killed for money and didn't lose sleep over it. 1,000 in gold, the hunter said. We can split it. Just hand over the woman. Ethan shot him in the face. 3 down, 1 left. He made it back to the cabin just as the last hunter tried to break through the front door. Evelyn's rifle cracked from upstairs, and the man staggered, hit in the shoulder. But he didn't go down. Instead, he turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Ethan tracked him for 20 yards before finding him collapsed against a tree, clutching his wound. The man looked up as Ethan approached, fear and pain written across his features. "Please," he gasped. They offered money. I didn't." "I know," Ethan said, and shot him anyway. When he returned to the cabin, Evelyn was standing in the doorway, rifle still in her hands, face white as the snow around them. "Is it over?" she asked. "For now." "Are they all—" "Oh, yeah, they're all dead." Evelyn swayed. Ethan caught her before she fell, lowering her to sit on the porch step. She was shaking, adrenaline crash hitting hard now that the danger had passed. "I killed a man," she whispered. "I saw him coming and I didn't even think, You did what you had to do. He would have killed you without hesitation." I know that. But I can still see his face, the way he looked when— "Don't!" Ethan gripped her shoulders. "Don't do that to yourself. You survived. That's what matters." But he could see in her eyes that she didn't believe him, that the knowledge of what she'd done was going to haunt her, the same way his own killing haunted him. Welcome to the club, he thought bitterly. Welcome to the rest of us who had to become monsters to survive. They buried the bodies that afternoon, 4 graves in the frozen ground, unmarked and unmourned. Ethan worked in grim silence while Evelyn watched from the cabin window, still too shaken to help. When it was done, he stood looking down at the disturbed snow, thinking about all the other graves he'd dug over the years. Too many. Far too many. "This won't be the last of them," he said when he returned to the cabin. "Ashton will send more. Better men, probably. And eventually they'll get through." "So what do we do?" Ethan looked at the ledger sitting on the table, at Evelyn sitting beside the fire, still trembling slightly, trying to hold herself together, at the blood still staining the snow outside his door. "We go on the offensive," he said. "We take the fight to Ashton before he can send anyone else after you." "How?" "That ledger. You said it could bring down his whole empire if it reached the right people. So let's make sure it reaches them. We'd have to get to Denver. That's over 300 miles through winter terrain, with bounty hunters looking for us the whole way." "I didn't say it would be easy. It's suicide." "Maybe. But staying here is definitely suicide. At least this way we have a chance." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to the table, and picked up the ledger. "When do we leave?" she asked. 3 days, Ethan said, still staring at the ledger in Evelyn's hands. "We need 3 days to prepare properly. Food, supplies, ammunition, and we need to plan a route that keeps us away from the main roads. 3 days might be too long. What if more hunters come?" "They will. But they'll be cautious now. 4 men came up here and none of them came back down. Ashton's people will hear about that, and they'll think twice before charging up this mountain again." Ethan moved to the window, scanning the tree line. "We've bought ourselves some time. Not much, but enough." Evelyn set the ledger down carefully as if it might explode. "You really think we can make it to Denver?" "I think we don't have much choice. And I think our odds are better moving than sitting here waiting for them to bring an army." That night, Ethan barely slept. He lay on his bedroll by the fire, listening to Evelyn's breathing from the bed across the room, and ran through scenarios in his mind. The journey to Denver would take at least 2 weeks on horseback, longer if the weather turned bad. They'd need to avoid towns, stick to wilderness routes, travel mostly at night. Even then, they'd be vulnerable, exposed. Around midnight, Evelyn's voice cut through the darkness. Are you awake? Yeah. Can't sleep either? No. Silence stretched between them. Then Evelyn said, I keep thinking about the man I shot, wondering if he had a family. Children, maybe. A wife waiting for him somewhere. Probably did, Ethan said. He wasn't going to lie to her about it. Most men do. Does that make it easier? Knowing they chose this? That they came here planning to kill me for money? Nothing makes it easier. You just learn to live with it. More silence. Then the sound of Evelyn moving, her feet touching the floor. She crossed the room and sat down beside him, wrapped in a blanket, her face illuminated by the dying firelight. How many? She asked quietly. How many men have you killed? Ethan stared at the ceiling beams. Stopped counting after 20. That was during the war. Since then, maybe another dozen. Men who tried to rob me mostly. Couple of claim jumpers. One fool who thought he could take my pelts without paying. Do you regret it? The war deaths? Some of them. The others? He shook his head. They made their choices. Same as those hunters today. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter. I don't want to become that. Someone who kills without feeling anything. Too late. You already crossed that line when you pulled the trigger. Now you just have to decide what kind of person you're going to be on this side of it. And what kind of person are you? Ethan turned his head to look at her. Still figuring that out. She held his gaze for a long moment, then leaned down and rested her head on his shoulder. Just that. Nothing more. But Ethan felt something shift in his chest, some wall he'd built 15 years ago developing a crack. 3 days, Evelyn whispered. Then we leave this place. Yeah, then we leave. The next morning, Ethan woke to find Evelyn already up, sorting through their supplies with methodical efficiency. She'd laid everything out on the table. Ammunition, dried meat, coffee, blankets, rope. Taking inventory. We're short on food, she said without looking up. If the journey takes 2 weeks, we'll be on half rations by the end. I can hunt along the way. That means stopping, making camp, leaving tracks, giving them time to catch up. You got a better idea? Evelyn straightened, pushing hair out of her face. What if we don't go straight to Denver? What if we stop in one of the smaller towns first, get more supplies, maybe even send word ahead to the federal marshals? Any town between here and Denver is a risk. Ashton might have men watching. He can't watch everywhere. There are dozens of settlements along the route. Ethan considered it. She wasn't wrong. Lawrence Ashton was rich and powerful, but even he couldn't have eyes in every mining camp and railroad town across 300 miles of territory. We'd need to be careful, he said, in and out fast. No lingering, no asking questions that might make people remember us. I can do that. Can you? Ethan moved closer, studying her face. Because the woman I pulled out of that snowdrift couldn't lie worth a damn. Every emotion showed clear as day. That gets us caught. We're both dead. Something hardened in Evelyn's expression. The woman you pulled out of that snowdrift doesn't exist anymore. She died in the snow with those hunters. What's left is someone who knows how to survive. Good. Because that's who we need if we're going to make it. They spent the rest of that day preparing. Ethan showed Evelyn how to pack efficiently, how to distribute weight in saddlebags so the horses wouldn't tire too quickly. He cleaned and oiled every weapon they owned, checked every round of ammunition, sharpened his knives until they could split hairs. Evelyn watched him work, occasionally asking questions, learning. She was quick. Ethan had to give her that. Picked things up fast, remembered details. The expensive finishing school education she'd mentioned once was evident in the way she approached problems. Systematic, organized, thorough. You would have made a good soldier, Ethan said, half joking. My father wanted sons. Got me instead. Spent my whole childhood disappointing him. His loss. Evelyn smiled, brief and sad. He died thinking I'd wasted my potential by taking a secretarial position instead of marrying well. Wonder what he'd think now. Probably that you got yourself into a mess that didn't concern you. Definitely that. He believed in keeping your head down, not making waves, accepting the way things are. She paused in her packing. But I couldn't. Not after Margaret. Not after seeing what Ashton was capable of. Your father teach you to shoot? No. Stablehand did when I was 12. My father would have been furious if he'd known. Said guns were unladylike. Evelyn checked the cylinder on her revolver with practiced ease. Guess I was never very good at being a lady. Lucky for you. The second day, they focused on the route. Ethan had an old map, yellowed and torn at the edges, showing the major trails and settlements between the San Juan Mountains and Denver. He spread it across the table and they studied it together, Evelyn leaning close enough that her shoulder pressed against his. Here, Ethan said, pointing to a spot about 80 miles northeast. Town called Silverton. It's on the railroad line, lots of traffic. We can blend in, get supplies, maybe get information about whether Ashton's men are still actively searching. That's only 3 days' ride. What about the rest of the journey? We follow the rail line north until we hit the Continental Divide, then cut east through the high country. Harder terrain, but fewer people. Less chance of running into trouble. And when we get close to Denver, that's when it gets dangerous. The city will be crawling with Ashton's people. We'll need to figure out who we can trust, how to get the ledger to someone with enough power to act on it. Evelyn traced the route with her finger. Federal Marshal's office is downtown, but they'll be watching it. Probably. We need someone else. Someone outside Ashton's normal sphere of influence. There's a newspaper editor, man named Thomas Burke. He published some articles questioning the railroad company's land acquisitions last year. Got sued for libel, but he didn't back down. Could he be trusted? Maybe. He lost the lawsuit, had to print a retraction, but the rumors say he only did it to avoid bankruptcy, that he still believes the company is corrupt. Rumors aren't evidence. No, but it's a start. Better than walking into the marshal's office and getting arrested before we can explain ourselves. Ethan nodded slowly. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. More than they'd had yesterday. On the third day, Ethan took Evelyn on a final training session. They rode out to a narrow canyon about a mile from the cabin, a place where the rock walls amplified sound and created confusing echoes. If we get into trouble, it'll probably be in terrain like this, Ethan explained, dismounting. Somewhere we can't see far, can't maneuver easily. You need to know how to fight in tight spaces. He set up scenarios. Attackers coming from behind rocks, from above, from multiple directions at once. Made Evelyn practice drawing her weapon quickly, acquiring targets fast, making split-second decisions about when to shoot and when to take cover. Don't think, he barked when she hesitated. React. Thinking gets you killed. Evelyn fired, missed, swore under her breath. Again. She did better the second time, better still the third. By the time the sun was setting, her hands were steady and her eyes were hard. She'd shed another layer of the frightened woman who'd been buried in the snow. What remained was something sharper, more dangerous. You'll do, Ethan said finally. High praise. It's the truth. You're not a soldier, but you're not helpless either. That's all we need. They rode back to the cabin in comfortable silence. The mountains were beautiful in the dying light, all purple shadows and gold-touched peaks. Ethan had spent 15 years in this wilderness, but he'd never really looked at it the way Evelyn did now, with an expression that was part wonder, part grief. You'll miss this place, she said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, probably. We could come back, after. Once Ashton's in custody and the ledger's been made public, you could return to your cabin. Ethan didn't answer. They both knew it was a fantasy. Once they left, there was no coming back. This life, this sanctuary he'd built, it would be gone, burned away by whatever fire they were about to walk into. That night, they packed the last of their supplies. 2 horses, both strong mountain breeds used to rough terrain, enough food for 10 days if they stretched it, ammunition for a small war, the ledger wrapped in oilcloth and secured in Evelyn's saddlebag where she could reach it quickly if needed. Ethan did a final check of the cabin, making sure nothing incriminating was left behind. Not that it mattered much. The 4 bodies buried outside pretty much announced his involvement, but old habits died hard. Ready? He asked as the first light of dawn began to gray the windows. Evelyn adjusted her coat, checked her weapons one last time, then nodded. Ready. They rode out as the sun broke over the peaks, leaving the cabin behind without looking back. The snow had melted enough to reveal patches of brown earth, and the air smelled like spring, pine sap, wet stone, new growth struggling up through the frost. The first 2 days passed without incident. They kept to game trails and ridgelines, avoiding the main paths where other travelers might spot them. Camped cold at night, no fires, huddled together for warmth under shared blankets while the horses stood nearby. Evelyn proved to be a better rider than Ethan had expected. She sat her horse well, adjusted to the terrain, didn't complain about the long hours in the saddle, or the meager rations, or the way her muscles screamed from sleeping on frozen ground. "Where'd you learn to ride like that?" Ethan asked on the second night. "Told you, I grew up on a farm. We had horses. I practically lived in the saddle until I was 14, and my father decided it was time for me to learn how to be respectable." "What happened at 14? "Mother died. Father sold the farm and moved us to Denver. Figured city life would give me better marriage prospects." She laughed bitterly. "Worked out great, obviously." "You never married?" "Came close once. Man named Robert, lawyer, good family, everything my father wanted. But he hit me during an argument one night, and I broke his nose with a candlestick. Father was furious, said I'd ruined my chances over nothing." "Smart woman." "Didn't feel smart at the time. Felt alone." Ethan understood that feeling. He'd been alone for 15 years, and it had seemed like safety. But now, riding through the darkness with Evelyn beside him, he realized it had really been prison. On the third day, they spotted riders in the distance. Ethan saw them first, 3 men on horseback moving along the valley floor about 2 miles south. Too far to make out details, but close enough to be a threat. "Could be miners," Evelyn said, squinting. "Could be, or could be hunters." Ethan urged his horse into the cover of nearby trees. "Either way, we don't take chances." They waited, watching. The riders moved east, parallel to their route, but not intersecting. After 20 minutes, they disappeared over a ridge. "Keep moving," Ethan said, "but stay alert." That night, they made camp in a dense stand of spruce where the trees would hide any firelight. Ethan finally allowed a small fire, more for morale than warmth. They roasted the last of the dried venison and drank coffee so strong it could have stripped paint. "Tell me about the war," Evelyn said suddenly. Ethan stiffened. "Why?" "Because I want to understand you, and because you've been carrying it around like a weight, and maybe talking about it would help." "Talking doesn't help." "How do you know? Have you tried?" Ethan stared into the fire, watching flames dance and twist. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then slowly, the words started coming. "I was 22 when it started. Signed up because everyone else was signing up, because it seemed like the thing to do. They gave me a rifle and 2 weeks training and sent me off to kill people I'd never met over causes I didn't fully understand." He paused, swallowed. "First man I killed, I threw up afterwards. Third man, I didn't. By the 10th, I stopped counting. It became routine. Point, shoot, move on. We marched through towns and burned them, shot deserters from our own side, did things—" His voice cracked. "Did things I can't ever take back." Evelyn reached across the fire and took his hand. Didn't say anything, just held on. "When it ended," Ethan continued, "I went home. Found my family's farm burned to the ground. My parents dead. Sister missing, probably dead too. Everything I'd fought for, everything I thought I was protecting, gone. And the men who gave the orders, who started the whole damn war. They were fine. Rich, comfortable, already talking about the next conflict. So you came here?" "So I came here. Figured if I went far enough away I could forget. Could stop seeing their faces every time I closed my eyes." He looked up at Evelyn. "Didn't work. Still see them. Every single one. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I made my choices. Just like those hunters made theirs. Just like you made yours when you took that ledger." Ethan squeezed her hand. "We're all just trying to survive what we've done." They sat in silence after that, hands still clasped, the fire burning low between them. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The horses shifted and settled, and for a moment, the weight on Ethan's chest felt a little lighter. They reached Silverton late on the 4th day. The town sprawled across a narrow valley, buildings clustered around the railroad tracks like barnacles on a ship's hull. Smoke rose from 100 chimneys, and even from a distance, Ethan could hear the stamp mill's rhythmic pounding, crushing ore from the mines that dotted the surrounding hills. "We go in separately," Ethan said as they prepared to descend. "You visit the general store, get food. I'll check the saloons, see if anyone's asking questions about strangers." "What if they recognize me?" "Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. Pay cash and leave. You'll be fine." But Evelyn looked nervous as they rode into town. Her hand kept drifting to the revolver hidden beneath her coat. and her eyes darted from face to face, searching for threats. "Relax," Ethan murmured. "You look guilty." "I am guilty." "Then look bored instead, just another traveler passing through." They split up at the edge of town. Ethan watched Evelyn disappear into the general store, then turned his horse toward the largest saloon. The Lucky Strike was already busy despite the early hour, miners drinking away their wages and gamblers working the tables. Ethan ordered whiskey and found a spot at the bar where he could watch the room. Listened to conversations, caught fragments of gossip. Someone's claim had played out. Someone else had struck a new vein. The railroad was hiring, wages weren't what they used to be, winter had been too damn long, no mention of bounties, no strangers asking questions. He was starting to relax when a man sat down beside him. Tall, well-dressed for a mining town, with cold gray eyes that had seen too much. "You're Crow," the man said. Wasn't a question. Ethan's hand moved toward his gun. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know you, or rather, I know of you. Mountain man from up near the San Juans, keeps to himself, doesn't come to town often." The man signaled for whiskey. "Except you've been here twice in the past month. That's unusual." "Maybe I needed supplies." "Maybe. Or maybe you've got company up there in your cabin. Company that some powerful people are very interested in finding." Ethan's blood went cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." The man's whiskey arrived. He sipped it slowly, never taking his eyes off Ethan. "Here's the thing, Crow. I'm not a bounty hunter. I'm not one of Ashton's men. I'm something else entirely." "What's that?" "Someone who thinks Lawrence Ashton is a cancer that needs cutting out. Someone who's been waiting for years for evidence solid enough to bring him down." The man leaned closer. "Someone who knows Evelyn Hart has that evidence and is trying to get it to Denver." Ethan's hand was on his gun now, gripped tight. "How do you know that name?" "Because I worked for Ashton, security chief at his Denver office. Saw things that made me sick. When I couldn't stomach it anymore, I quit. Been following his operations ever since, trying to find a way to stop him." The man set down his glass. "Then I heard about a missing ledger and a dead housemaid and a secretary who disappeared into the mountains. Put the pieces together." "You're lying." "Am I?" "Then why is your hand shaking? Why are you trying so hard not to look at the door, where I'm betting your companion just walked in to buy supplies?" Ethan forced himself to stay calm, to think. This could be a trap. Could be Ashton's man playing a deeper game, or it could be exactly what it appeared to be, an opportunity. "What do you want?" he asked. "To help. Ashton's got men watching the federal marshal's office in Denver. He's got judges in his pocket, politicians on his payroll. If you try to deliver that ledger through official channels, you'll be dead before you reach the courthouse steps. And you have a better plan? I have contacts. People who owe me favors. People who can get the ledger into the right hands without Ashton knowing until it's too late." The man pulled out a piece of paper, wrote quickly, and slid it across the bar. "This is where you can find me in Denver. Bring the ledger there, and I'll make sure it reaches the territorial governor himself. Man named Patterson, incorruptible as they come. He'll act on it." Ethan looked at the address. "Why should I trust you?" "Because you don't have a choice. You're walking into a city controlled by the man you're trying to destroy, carrying evidence that could get you killed 100 times over. You need help, whether you want to admit it or not." Before Ethan could respond, the man stood. "Think about it. You've got maybe a week before Ashton's people figure out where you're heading. After that?" He shrugged. "After that, you're on your own." He walked out, leaving Ethan sitting at the bar with a piece of paper and a decision to make. Evelyn was waiting at the edge of town with fresh supplies and worry written across her face. "What took so long?" "Trouble. Maybe. I'm not sure yet." Ethan told her about the conversation as they rode out, heading north again, putting distance between themselves and Silverton. "It could be a trap," Evelyn said when he'd finished. "I know. Or it could be legitimate." "I know that too. So what do we do?" Ethan looked at the piece of paper, at the address written in neat, precise handwriting. Looked at Evelyn, at the trust in her eyes, despite everything she'd been through. "We keep going," he said. "Get to Denver. Then we decide if this man is telling the truth or setting us up to die." The next 5 days were brutal. They pushed hard, covering 30 miles a day, stopping only when the horses were exhausted. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed toward the Continental Divide, the air thinner, the cold deeper. Snow still clung to the high passes, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through drifts that sometimes came up to their waists. Evelyn never complained, just kept moving, kept pushing forward, even when Ethan could see exhaustion dragging at her. She'd become someone different during these weeks, harder, tougher, more resilient than the woman he'd pulled from that snowdrift. On the 8th day, they spotted more riders. This time there were 6 of them, moving deliberately, searching. Ethan and Evelyn hid in a ravine while the hunters passed within 100 yards, close enough to hear their voices. Tracks. Definitely recent. Could be anyone. 1,000 in gold says they're not just anyone. The voices faded. Ethan waited another hour before they emerged, nerves stretched tight. The hunters were getting closer, more organized. Someone was coordinating the search, feeding them information. "They know where we're going," Evelyn said that night as they made camp in a cave, wind howling outside. "They're not just searching randomly anymore. They're herding us. Toward Denver." "Yeah, I noticed." "So what do we do? Change direction? Try to lose them?" "No, we're 9 days out now, maybe 10. Changing course just buys them more time to set up ambushes." Ethan checked his ammunition for the 3rd time that evening. "We push through, fast and hard, don't give them time to organize. And when we get to Denver, then we find out if that man in Silverton was telling the truth." They rode through this night, pushing the horses harder than they should have. By dawn, they'd covered another 20 miles, and the mountains were finally giving way to foothills, the air warming, civilization creeping closer. On the 10th day, they saw Denver in the distance. The city sprawled across the plains like a gray stain, smoke rising from factories and trains, buildings clustered tight. From here, it looked peaceful, ordinary. But Ethan knew better. Somewhere in that maze of streets and structures, Lawrence Ashton was waiting. "Last chance to turn back," he said to Evelyn. She looked at the city, then at the ledger in her saddlebag, then back at Ethan. "No, we've come too far, given up too much. We see this through to the end, whatever that looks like. Could be both of us dead in a ditch. Could be. Or it could be Ashton in chains and justice for Margaret and everyone else he's destroyed." She smiled, fierce and determined. "I'll take those odds." Ethan felt something warm bloom in his chest. Pride, maybe, or something deeper. "Then let's finish this." They rode toward Denver as the sun climbed higher, 2 figures on horseback carrying secrets that could topple an empire. Behind them, the mountains watched in silence. Ahead, the city waited. And somewhere in between, Ethan knew the real battle was just beginning. They entered Denver just after noon, when the streets were crowded enough to disappear into, but not so packed that their horses would draw attention. Ethan kept his hat pulled low, his coat collar high. Beside him, Evelyn had tucked her hair beneath a wool cap and hunched her shoulders, making herself smaller, less memorable. The city assaulted their senses after weeks in the wilderness. Too many people, too much noise, the stench of coal smoke and unwashed bodies and horse manure baking in the spring sun. Wagons clattered over cobblestones. Street vendors shouted their wares. A train whistle screamed somewhere to the east. "I forgot how much I hate this," Evelyn muttered. "Stay close. Don't look anyone in the eye." They navigated through the commercial district, past storefronts and hotels and saloons spilling drunks onto the sidewalks despite the early hour. Ethan kept checking behind them, watching for followers, but the crowd made it impossible to tell if they were being tracked. The address from the man in Silverton led them to a narrow street on the eastern edge of downtown, where the buildings grew shabbier and the people looked harder. Number 47 was a boarding house, 3 stories of peeling paint and crooked shutters, the kind of place where nobody asked questions as long as the rent was paid. "This is it," Ethan said, dismounting. "Stay with the horses. I'll check it out." "No." Evelyn swung down from her saddle. "We go together or not at all?" "Evelyn, I didn't ride 300 miles to wait outside while you walk into a potential trap alone. We're partners in this. Act like it." Ethan wanted to argue, but the set of her jaw told him it would be pointless. "Fine, but you stay behind me, and if shooting starts, you run. Understand?" "Sure." "I mean it." "I said sure, didn't I?" They climbed the steps to the boarding house. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, opening into a dim hallway that smelled of boiled cabbage and cheap whiskey. A woman sat at a desk inside, ancient and skeletal, eyeing them with suspicion. "Help you?" Her voice sounded like gravel in a tin can. "Looking for room 12, Ethan said. "Second floor, stairs are that way." She jerked her thumb toward a staircase that looked one strong wind away from collapse. "Don't cause trouble. I run a respectable establishment." The stairs creaked under their weight. Ethan kept his hand near his gun, every nerve alert. Room 12 was at the end of the hall, door slightly ajar. Light spilled through the gap. Ethan drew his revolver, pushed the door open with his boot. The man from Silverton sat at a small table, 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey waiting. He looked up as they entered, unsurprised, as if he'd been expecting them all along. "Right on time," he said. "Close the door." Ethan didn't lower his gun. "Give me one good reason not to shoot you right now." "Because I'm the only chance you've got of living through the next 24 hours. The man gestured to the chairs. "Sit. We don't have much time."
"Who are you?" Evelyn demanded. "Your real name, not whatever story you told in Silverton." "James Whitmore, former head of security for the Colorado Mountain Railroad. Now just someone trying to clean up a mess before it destroys everything." He poured whiskey into both glasses. "I wasn't lying about Ashton. Everything I told Crow was true, including the part about you walking into a death trap." Ethan finally holstered his gun, but remained standing. "What do you know?"
"I know that Ashton has 12 men watching the federal marshal's office. I know he's bribed half the police force and owns the district attorney outright. I know he's been watching the roads into Denver for the past week, waiting for you to show up." Whitmore took a drink. "And I know that if you try to deliver that ledger through any official channel, you'll be arrested for theft and fraud before you make it 10 feet. "Then what do you suggest?" Evelyn asked. "The territorial governor, Harrison Patterson. He's up for re-election this year and can't afford to be seen as corrupt. More importantly, he hates Ashton. They've been enemies for years, ever since Ashton tried to buy him and Patterson told him to go to hell. And you can get us to him?" "I can get the ledger to him. You two need to disappear until the evidence is made public." Ethan shook his head. "No. We deliver it ourselves, face to face. Otherwise, how do we know you won't just take it to Ashton? Because if I wanted to give you to Ashton, I would have done it in Silverton." Whitmore leaned forward. "Listen to me. Ashton knows you're in Denver by now. He's got people looking everywhere. The longer you stay visible, the more danger you're in. Give me the ledger, let me handle the delivery, and get yourself somewhere safe." "Define safe," Evelyn said. "There's a church on the north side, St. Catherine's. The priest there owes me a favor. He'll hide you until this is over." "And how long will that take?" 2 days? Maybe 3. Once Patterson has the ledger and verifies its contents, he'll have Ashton arrested. After that, you'll be safe to testify." Ethan looked at Evelyn. She was chewing her bottom lip, thinking hard. The ledger was still in her saddlebag downstairs, close enough to grab and run if this went bad. "I don't like it," Ethan said. "Too many variables. Too much trust required." "You got a better plan?" "Yeah, we take the ledger straight to the governor's mansion. Right now. Force our way in if we have to." Whitmore laughed, short and bitter. "You'd never make it past the gates. Ashton's men are watching that place like hawks. The second they see you, you're done. Then we—" The window exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the room as gunfire erupted from the street below. Ethan dove for cover, dragging Evelyn down with him. Whitmore was already moving, overturning the table, pulling his own weapon. "They found us!" he shouted over the gunfire. "Out the back, now!" More shots punched through the walls. Wood splintered. Plaster dust filled the air. Ethan fired back through the broken window, saw men in the street below, at least 6 of them, rifles raised. "Go!" Whitmore was at the door, covering them. "I'll hold them off." "Like hell!" Ethan grabbed Evelyn's arm, pulled her toward the window on the opposite wall. "This way!" He kicked out the remaining glass and looked down. 10-foot drop to an alley, manageable. Behind them, boots thundered on the stairs. Whitmore fired twice, and someone screamed. "Jump!" Ethan ordered. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She climbed through the window and dropped, hitting the alley hard but rolling to absorb the impact. Ethan followed, his knees protesting the landing. Above them, gunfire continued, Whitmore's revolver answering the rifles. They ran.
The alley opened onto a side street. Their horses were gone, either stolen or scattered by the shooting. Ethan cursed, looking around frantically for options. The gunfire was getting closer.
This way! Evelyn pulled him toward a narrow gap between buildings, barely wide enough for a person. They squeezed through, emerged into another alley, then another street. Kept running, dodging pedestrians, ignoring shouts. Behind them, men were following. Ethan caught glimpses. Dark coats, weapons barely concealed. Professional hunters, not street thugs. The church, Evelyn gasped. Whitmore said north side, too far. We need cover now.
A warehouse loomed ahead, doors standing open. Ethan pulled Evelyn inside into darkness that smelled of sawdust and machine oil. They ran deeper into the building, past stacks of lumber and idle equipment, looking for another exit. Voices at the entrance. Their pursuers had followed them in. Ethan found a staircase, wooden and rickety, leading up to a second-floor catwalk. They climbed quickly, trying to stay quiet. Below, flashlight beams cut through the darkness, searching.
Split up! A voice called. Check every corner. They're in here somewhere. Ethan and Evelyn crouched behind a stack of crates on the catwalk, breathing hard. The ledger was still in Evelyn's coat pocket. She'd grabbed it before jumping from the window. Their only leverage, their only hope, pressed against her ribs. 3 men down there, Ethan whispered. Maybe more outside. Can we fight our way out? Not without getting killed. So we hide? Until dark. Then we move. But even as he said it, Ethan knew it was a slim hope. The hunters weren't going anywhere. They'd search every inch of this warehouse, and eventually they'd find them. A flashlight beam swept across the catwalk, inches from their position. Ethan held his breath. Beside him, Evelyn's hand found his, squeezed tight. The beam moved on. Time crawled. Minutes felt like hours. Below, the hunters searched methodically, professional and patient. Ethan counted 4 distinct voices now, bad odds for a gunfight in an enclosed space. Ethan, Evelyn breathed. If we don't make it out of this, don't. Listen, if they get me, you take the ledger and run. Get it to Patterson somehow. Promise me. I'm not leaving you. Promise me. Ethan turned to look at her. Even in the darkness, he could see the determination in her eyes. The same expression she'd worn when she'd talked about bringing down Ashton, about justice for Margaret. I promise, he lied, because he knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't keep that promise. Couldn't. Whatever happened next, they were in it together. The search continued for another 20 minutes. Then, just when Ethan was starting to think they might actually hide until dark, a voice called from the warehouse entrance. Boss wants them alive. Found their horses. Woman's saddlebag had some interesting papers. She's definitely the one we want. Ethan's blood went cold. The ledger wasn't in Evelyn's coat. It was still in her saddlebag, which meant, That's not possible, Evelyn whispered, patting her coat frantically. I grabbed it. I know I... But she hadn't. In the chaos of the gunfight and the jump from the window, she'd grabbed her coat but left the saddlebag on the horse. No, Evelyn's voice broke. No, no, no. Quiet, Ethan hissed, but it was too late. A flashlight beam caught them. There, second floor. Gunfire erupted. Bullets slammed into the crates around them, wood exploding into splinters. Ethan returned fire, his shots forcing the hunters to scatter for cover, but there were too many of them, and they had the exits blocked. We're trapped, Evelyn said. I know. I'm sorry, I failed. After everything, all those people who died, and I... Stop it, Ethan grabbed her shoulders. Listen to me. We're not done yet. You hear me? We're not done. But even as he said it, he could hear more men entering the warehouse. The net was closing. In minutes, maybe seconds, they'd be overwhelmed. Then the explosion came. The front of the warehouse erupted in flames and smoke. The blast threw everyone to the ground, Ethan's ears ringing, vision swimming. Through the chaos, he saw a figure silhouetted against the fire. Whitmore, bleeding from a dozen wounds, holding what looked like a stick of dynamite. Run! Whitmore shouted. Back exit! Now! Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He hauled Evelyn to her feet and ran along the catwalk toward the rear of the building. Behind them, another explosion, more screaming. Whitmore was buying them time with his own life. They found a ladder, climbed down, burst through a back door into an alley. Smoke billowed from the warehouse, and in the distance, fire bells were already clanging. Keep moving, Ethan gasped. They ran through a maze of back streets and alleys, putting distance between themselves and the burning warehouse. Finally, when Ethan's lungs were screaming and Evelyn was stumbling with exhaustion, they ducked into an abandoned stable and collapsed. "Whitmore," Evelyn panted. "Is he dead?" "Probably. Maybe took some of them with him." "The ledger?" "Gone. Ashton has it by now." Evelyn covered her face with her hands. Her whole body was shaking. "It's over. We lost. Everything we went through, everyone who died, and we lost." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her there was still hope, still a chance, but the truth was heavy in his chest like a stone. Ashton had the ledger. Without it, they had no evidence, no leverage, nothing. "We need to leave Denver," he said quietly. "Tonight. Get far away before Ashton's men find us again." "And go where? Back to the mountains? Pretend this never happened?" "If that's what it takes to keep you alive, yes." "I don't want to just survive anymore, Ethan. I want—" Her voice broke. "I wanted to matter. I wanted Margaret's death to mean something." Ethan pulled her close, held her while she shook with silent sobs. Outside, the city continued its noise and chaos, indifferent to their failure. Somewhere out there, Lawrence Ashton was probably celebrating, the ledger burning in his fireplace, the threat to his empire eliminated. They'd lost. They sat in the abandoned stable as darkness fell, neither speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. Ethan's mind kept circling back to the same question. What now? They couldn't stay in Denver. It was only a matter of time before Ashton's men found them. But leaving meant giving up, meant admitting defeat. "There has to be something," Evelyn said suddenly. "Some way to still—" "There isn't. Without the ledger, we have nothing. Your word against his, and he owns half the territory. We lost. So we just give up? Let him win? We survive. That's all we can do now." Evelyn stood abruptly, pacing the small space. I can't just walk away, not after everything." "You don't have a choice. There's always a choice." She turned on him, eyes blazing. "You of all people should know that. You chose to save me instead of leaving me in that snowdrift. You chose to help me even when it put your life at risk. Don't tell me now that we don't have choices." Before Ethan could respond, a noise from outside froze them both. Footsteps. Multiple people, moving with purpose. Ethan drew his gun, positioned himself between Evelyn and the door. The footsteps came closer, stopped just outside. Then a voice, familiar. "Crow? Miss Hart? If you're in there, don't shoot. I'm alone and unarmed." Ethan recognized the voice but couldn't place it. "Who are you?" "Thomas Burke, editor of the Rocky Mountain Dispatch. Evelyn mentioned me to you once, I believe." Evelyn's eyes went wide. "The newspaper man? The one I said we could trust?" "Maybe." Ethan kept his gun raised. "Come in slowly. Hands where I can see them." The door creaked open. A man entered. Middle-aged, ink-stained fingers, wire-rimmed spectacles. He did indeed have his hands raised, and Ethan could see no weapons. "How did you find us?" Ethan demanded. "Whitmore. Before he died, he sent a boy to my office with a message. Said if anything happened to him, I should look for you two at this location." Burke lowered his hands carefully. "I'm sorry about James. He was a good man." "What do you want?" "To help. If you'll let me." Burke looked at Evelyn. "I know who you are. I know what you were trying to do. And I know Ashton has the ledger now." "Then you know we failed," Evelyn said bitterly. "Not necessarily." Burke reached into his coat. Ethan's gun tracked the movement and pulled out a folded newspaper. "I had time to read the ledger before Ashton's men took it. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to write this." He handed the paper to Evelyn. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The headline read, "Railroad Baron's Empire Built on Murder and Corruption. Evidence points to decades of crime." "I'm publishing this tomorrow morning," Burke said. "Front page. Every detail I could remember from the ledger. Names, dates, amounts. It won't be as damning as the original ledger, but it'll be enough to start an investigation. Enough to make Ashton's political friends distance themselves. Enough to give federal prosecutors something to work with." Evelyn was reading, her eyes getting wider with each paragraph. "You did this, even knowing what Ashton would do to you? He already destroyed my career once. Might as well make it count for something." Burke smiled grimly. "Besides, I'm tired of watching evil men win because good people are too afraid to fight back. He'll kill you, Ethan said bluntly. Probably, but the paper will be distributed by then. Can't unring that bell. Burke looked between them. The question is, what will you two do? You can run, disappear, try to build new lives somewhere far from here. Or you can stay and testify when the prosecutors come calling. Your choice. Ethan looked at Evelyn, saw the decision already forming in her eyes. We stay, she said quietly. We see this through. Evelyn. I'm not running anymore, Ethan. Burke is putting his life on the line. Whitmore died buying us time. Margaret and all those others deserve better than us hiding in the mountains pretending none of this happened. She turned to him, and her eyes were clear, certain. I'm staying. I'm testifying. And I'm making sure Lawrence Ashton pays for what he's done. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to grab her and run and never look back. But he'd learned over these past weeks that when Evelyn Hart set her mind to something, earthquakes couldn't move her. Then I'm staying too, he said. You don't have to. Yeah, I do. Told you before, if I'm going to save your life, I'm going to do it right. That includes keeping you alive through whatever comes next. Burke cleared his throat. Touching. But we need to get you two somewhere safe until the paper hits the streets. Once it does, all hell is going to break loose, and Ashton will be desperate. Desperate men do desperate things. Where? Ethan asked. The church Whitmore mentioned, St. Catherine's. The priest there has hidden people before. He'll keep you safe. They left the stable under cover of darkness, Burke leading them through back streets and alleys to the northern edge of the city. St. Catherine's was a modest stone building, old and weathered, surrounded by a cemetery where headstones leaned at drunken angles. The priest who answered their knock was younger than Ethan expected, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of manual labor. Father Michael, Burke said. These are the ones Whitmore told you about. The priest nodded, stepping aside. Come in, quickly. The church was simple inside, wooden pews, plain altar, candles flickering in the darkness. Father Michael led them to a small room behind the altar, barely large enough for two people. You'll be safe here, he said. No one will disturb you. I'll bring food and water. Just stay quiet and stay hidden. Thank you, Father, Evelyn said. When Burke and the priest had gone, Ethan and Evelyn were alone in the tiny room with nothing but a single candle for light. The walls seemed to press in, the space impossibly small after weeks of open mountains and endless sky. This is it, Evelyn said softly. Tomorrow, everything changes. Yeah. Are you scared? Ethan considered the question honestly. Yeah, I am. Good. Me too. She moved closer until they were sitting shoulder to shoulder in the cramped space. Thank you. For everything. For saving me, for helping me, for not giving up even when you should have. Don't thank me yet. We're not safe. Won't be for a long time, maybe never. I know, but still. Thank you. She rested her head on his shoulder, and Ethan felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. For 15 years, he'd been alone, safe in his isolation, protected by distance and silence. Now here he was, in a church basement in Denver, wanted by one of the most powerful men in Colorado, with a woman who'd turned his whole world upside down. And he wouldn't change a thing. Evelyn, he said quietly, when this is over, if we survive. When we survive. When we survive. I don't want to go back to the mountains alone. Don't want to go back to being that person who doesn't care about anything. What do you want? Ethan took a breath. I want you with me. However that looks. Wherever that leads. He struggled for words. I want to stop running from everything. Evelyn lifted her head, looked at him in the candlelight. You mean that? Yeah, I do. She kissed him then. Not the quick brush on the cheek from before, but something real, something that spoke of hope and fear and the desperate need to hold on to something good in a world gone mad. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn smiled. Then we better make sure we survive this, because I want that too, all of it. They spent the rest of the night in that small room, talking quietly, making plans for a future that seemed impossibly fragile. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both, and they slept curled together on the floor, Ethan's coat serving as a blanket. He woke to the sound of church bells and Father Michael knocking softly on the door. It's morning, the priest said. The paper hit the streets an hour ago. The city is in an uproar. Ethan and Evelyn emerged into the church proper. Father Michael had a copy of the Rocky Mountain Dispatch spread on the altar. The headline screamed in bold type, and beneath it Burke's article laid out everything: the bribes, the murders, the corruption that stretched from Denver to Washington. "Is Burke," Evelyn started, "alive?" "For now. He's barricaded himself in his office with armed guards. Smart man." Father Michael looked worried. "But there are men in the streets, angry men, some calling for Ashton's arrest, others claiming it's all lies. The police don't know what to do, and Ashton himself has gone to ground." "The governor?" Ethan asked. "Called an emergency session of the territorial legislature. They're debating whether to issue an arrest warrant." "Debating," Evelyn said bitterly. "Of course they are. Ashton probably still has enough of them in his pocket to block it." But Father Michael shook his head. "I don't think so. Not anymore. The article was too detailed, too damning. Even the politicians who owe Ashton favors are distancing themselves. Nobody wants to be associated with this." They spent the morning in the church, listening to reports that Father Michael brought back from his trips into the city. By noon, federal marshals had arrived from the territorial capital. By afternoon, they'd raided Ashton's office and home. And by evening, as the sun set over Denver, Lawrence Ashton was in chains. The news reached them through Father Michael, who burst into the church with a huge smile. "They got him, arrested him at his mansion. He tried to flee, but the marshals were too quick. He's in custody." Evelyn sagged against Ethan, relief and disbelief warring on her face. "It's really over?" "Not quite," Father Michael said. "The prosecutors want to speak with you, both of you. Your testimony will be crucial for the trial." "When?" Ethan asked. "Tomorrow morning. I'll take you to them myself." That night they stayed in the church one more time. But the atmosphere was different now, lighter, full of cautious hope instead of desperate fear. They sat in a pew, watching candles flicker on the altar, and tried to process what had happened. "Margaret would be happy," Evelyn said softly, "knowing he finally faced justice." "Yeah, she would. All those others too. Everyone he hurt. They didn't die for nothing." Ethan took her hand. "No, they didn't." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Evelyn asked, "What happens now after we testify, after the trial?" "I don't know. Haven't thought that far ahead." "Liar, you're always thinking ahead." Ethan smiled despite himself. "Fine. I've thought about it, and I think—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "I think maybe it's time to stop hiding. Time to figure out who I am when I'm not running from my past." "And who do you think that person is?" "Someone better than I was. Maybe not good, but better. Someone who doesn't spend every day alone on a mountain, waiting to die." "Sounds like a start." "What about you?" Evelyn leaned against him. "I think I want to keep fighting. There are other men like Ashton out there, other corporations destroying lives for profit. Maybe I can help expose them, use what I learned working for him to bring down others like him." "Dangerous work." "I know, but I'm good at it, apparently, and someone needs to do it." "Then I'll help, if you want." She looked up at him, surprised. "You do that?" "Yeah, figure if I'm going to stop hiding, might as well do something worthwhile with my time." "Partners, then, in everything." "Partners," Ethan agreed. The next morning, they walked out of St. Catherine's into brilliant sunshine. The city was still chaotic. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse where Ashton was being held. Newspapers selling out as fast as they could be printed. But the anger had shifted. Now it was directed at Ashton, not at the woman who'd exposed him. The prosecutors were waiting at the federal building. They spent hours taking statements, recording every detail Evelyn could remember from her 3 years working for Ashton. Ethan corroborated what he could, filled in gaps about the hunters, the attacks, the desperate flight to Denver. By evening, they were done. The lead prosecutor, a stern woman with steel-gray hair, shook both their hands. "You did the right thing," she said. "Both of you. This man has been untouchable for too long. You made him touchable." Walking out of the federal building, Evelyn turned her face toward the setting sun. "We really did it." "Yeah, we did." "Now what?" Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his life half frozen and terrified, who'd become someone fierce and unbreakable, who'd reminded him that caring about something was worth the pain it brought. Now we figure out what comes next. Together. She smiled, and for the first time since he'd pulled her from that snowdrift, Ethan saw real peace in her eyes. They walked through Denver's streets as twilight fell, two survivors of a war that had almost destroyed them both. Behind them, the mountains rose against the darkening sky, the wilderness that had sheltered and tested them. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain and dangerous and full of possibility. And for the first time in 15 years, Ethan Crowe wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The trial began 6 weeks later, on a sweltering June morning when the heat made Denver's streets shimmer like water. Ethan and Evelyn sat in the courthouse gallery, surrounded by reporters, curious citizens, and people whose lives had been destroyed by Lawrence Ashton's empire. The air was thick with anticipation and the smell of too many bodies packed into too small a space. Ashton sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his face composed, almost bored. Looking at him now, Ethan found it hard to believe this was the man who'd sent hunters to kill them, who'd built an empire on the backs of murdered workers and corrupted officials. He looked ordinary, unremarkable, just another middle-aged businessman annoyed at being inconvenienced. But when Ashton's eyes swept the gallery and landed on Evelyn, something cold and vicious flickered across his face. A promise. You did this to me, those eyes said, and somehow, someday, you'll pay. Evelyn didn't flinch, just stared back until Ashton looked away. He thinks he's going to walk, she murmured to Ethan. Look at him. He actually believes his lawyers will get him out of this. Maybe they will. Men like him usually do. Not this time. Evelyn's voice was hard. I won't let him. The prosecutor, the steel-haired woman whose name was Julia Reeves, stood and began her opening statement. She laid out the case methodically, piece by piece. The bribes to government officials, documented in the ledger. The workers who'd died in suspicious accidents at Ashton's mines, their families paid off to stay quiet. The land seized through intimidation and violence. The journalists and activists who'd disappeared or been found dead after questioning Ashton's business practices. And Margaret. Sweet 19-year-old Margaret, who'd tried to warn innocent families about a planned massacre and ended up hanging in her room, strangled first to keep her quiet. The gallery was silent by the time Reeves finished. Even Ashton's lawyers looked uncomfortable. The defense's opening statement was predictable. Character assassination of the witnesses, suggestions that the ledger was forged, insinuations that Evelyn was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. They painted Ashton as a victim of a conspiracy, a successful man being torn down by jealous rivals and bitter former employees. This is going to be ugly, Ethan said as they left the courthouse that first day. I know, but we've faced worse. They were staying in a modest boarding house on the west side of town, paid for by the prosecutor's office. 2 rooms sparsely furnished with locks that wouldn't stop a determined child. But it was temporary, just until the trial ended and they could figure out what came next. That evening, as they ate dinner in the boarding house's dining room, a man approached their table, young, nervous, with ink stains on his fingers. Miss Hart? Mr. Crowe? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm with the Denver Herald. I was wondering if you might answer a few questions about— No, Ethan said flatly. Please, just a few minutes. The public wants to know. The public can read about it in the trial transcripts. We're not giving interviews. The reporter left, dejected. But he was the first of many. Over the following days, they were approached by journalists, curiosity seekers, people who wanted to shake Evelyn's hand and tell her she was brave. Others who wanted to spit at her feet and call her a liar. I didn't expect this, Evelyn said one night, exhausted from another day of testimony. She'd spent 4 hours on the witness stand, answering questions about her time working for Ashton, about the ledger, about the night she'd fled Denver. All these people, all these opinions, like I'm some kind of symbol instead of just a person. That's what happens when you take on powerful men. You stop being yourself and become whatever story people want to tell about you. Is that what happened to you after the war? Ethan had been avoiding thinking about the war, about the person he'd been back then. But Evelyn deserved honesty. Yeah. I came home expecting to be treated like a hero. Instead, people either worshiped me for things I wasn't proud of or hated me for things I couldn't change. Got so I couldn't stand being around anyone. That's when I went to the mountains. Do you regret it? Going up there? No. I needed that time. Needed to be alone, to figure out who I was when nobody was watching.
He looked at her across the table. But I regret staying up there as long as I did. Became easier to hide than to deal with things. Started to think isolation was the same as safety. And now? Now I know better. Safety isn't about being alone. It's about being with people who matter, who you'd fight for, who'd fight for you. Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand. When this is over, when Ashton's convicted, what do you want to do? Ethan had been thinking about that question for weeks. Not go back to the cabin. Not hide anymore. Beyond that, I don't know. Maybe help you with whatever crusade you're planning next. It's not a crusade, it's... She paused, searching for words. It's just doing what needs to be done. There are more people like Ashton out there, more companies destroying lives for profit. Someone needs to hold them accountable. Why does it have to be you? Because I know how they operate. I spent 3 years watching Ashton's methods, learning his systems. I can recognize the patterns, spot the corruption. And because... She stopped, swallowed hard. Because Margaret can't. And all those other people who died can't, so I have to. That's a heavy burden to carry. I know. But it's mine, and I choose to carry it. The trial continued through June and into July. Witness after witness took the stand, each adding another piece to the prosecution's case. Mine workers who'd seen colleagues die in preventable accidents, families who'd been driven from their land by Ashton's thugs, a former business partner who testified about bribes paid to territorial officials. The defense fought hard, attacking every witness's credibility, suggesting alternative explanations for every piece of evidence. But the sheer weight of testimony was overwhelming. Even the defense lawyers seemed to be going through the motions by the third week. Then came the day Evelyn had been dreading. The prosecution calls Evelyn Hart to the stand. She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked to the witness box with her head high. Ethan watched from the gallery, his hands clenched tight enough that his knuckles went white. Julia Reeves led Evelyn through her testimony with practiced efficiency. How she'd come to work for Ashton, what she'd observed during her 3 years as his secretary. The night she'd discovered Margaret's body and realized it wasn't suicide, the decision to steal the ledger and flee. Evelyn's voice never wavered. She spoke clearly, precisely, meeting the jury's eyes as she described what she'd seen and why she'd acted. When Reeves showed her photographs of Margaret's body, Evelyn's face went pale, but she didn't look away. "And why did you risk your life to expose these crimes?" Reeves asked. "Because someone had to. Because Margaret deserved justice. Because all the people Mr. Ashton destroyed deserve to have their stories told." Evelyn looked directly at Ashton. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." Then came the cross-examination. Ashton's lead attorney was a man named Caldwell, 60 years old, with a reputation for destroying witnesses. He approached Evelyn with a patronizing smile. "Miss Hart, you claim to have worked for my client for 3 years. During that time, did he ever mistreat you?" "He treated me like I was invisible, like furniture. But he never threatened you, never harmed you?" "Not directly." "Not directly. So your complaints against him are really about his manner toward you, his failure to treat you with the respect you felt you deserved?" "No. My complaints are about the people he murdered. Allegedly murdered. You have no direct proof that Mr. Ashton personally killed anyone, do you?" "I have proof he ordered their deaths. That's the same thing." Caldwell shook his head, playing to the jury. "Is it? Or is it the interpretation of a disgruntled employee who decided to steal confidential documents when her employer failed to appreciate her?" "I wasn't disgruntled. I was horrified. Horrified enough to commit theft. Horrified enough to flee rather than report your concerns to authorities. Horrified enough to spend weeks hiding in the mountains with a man you barely knew." Caldwell's tone turned insinuating. "Tell me, Miss Hart, what exactly was your relationship with Mr. Crow during that time?" Ethan felt rage boil up in his chest. The bastard was trying to make it sound like, "He saved my life," Evelyn said coldly. "Multiple times. When Mr. Ashton's hunters found us, Mr. Crow fought them off. When we had no food, he hunted. When I was injured, he cared for me. Our relationship is none of your business, but if you're implying something improper, you're a fool." Several people in the gallery laughed. Caldwell's face reddened. "I'm simply trying to establish whether your judgment during this period was sound.
You were frightened, alone with a stranger, under extreme stress. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted? Well,
I didn't misinterpret Margaret's bruised throat. I didn't misinterpret the ledger documenting bribes and murders, and I didn't misinterpret the men who tried to kill me for exposing it. Evelyn leaned forward. The only thing I might have misinterpreted was thinking Mr. Ashton was just another greedy businessman. He's worse than that. He's a monster who destroys anyone who gets in his way. Your Honor, Caldwell protested, the witness is being inflammatory and—
The witness is telling the truth, Evelyn cut him off. And you know it. Everyone in this room knows it. The only question is whether this jury has the courage to convict a rich man, or whether they'll let him walk because it's easier than admitting the system is broken. The judge banged his gavel. Miss Hart, please confine yourself to answering the questions. But the damage was done. Evelyn's words hung in the air, challenging the jury to do the right thing. When she finally stepped down from the witness stand 2 hours later, she looked exhausted but unbowed. Ethan met her at the gallery exit. You did good. I called the jury cowards. Yeah, you did. But sometimes people need to be called out. Sometimes shame is the only thing that motivates them to act. That night, they sat on the roof of the boarding house, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The city stretched out below them, thousands of lives being lived in ignorance or indifference to the drama playing out in the courthouse. Do you think we'll win? Evelyn asked. I think the evidence is overwhelming, but juries are unpredictable. Rich men have walked away from worse charges. If he's acquitted, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know how I'll live with that. If he's acquitted, we'll figure something out. Maybe expose the jury members who took bribes, because that's the only way he could walk from this. Evelyn smiled despite herself. You've become quite the crusader. Learned from the best. They sat in silence for a while. Then Evelyn said, Whatever happens, I want you to know something. These past few months, they've been the hardest of my life, but also the most important. You taught me that I'm stronger than I thought, that I don't have to be alone in this fight. You were always strong. You just needed a reason to show it. Maybe. But you gave me that reason. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just pulled her close, let her rest her head on his shoulder. Below them, Denver settled into night, oblivious and uncaring. But up here, under the stars, something felt right, like they'd found something worth holding on to. The trial concluded in the 3rd week of July. Both sides gave their closing arguments. Reeves was powerful and precise, walking the jury through every piece of evidence, every testimony, building an irrefutable case. Caldwell tried to raise reasonable doubt, suggested alternative theories, painted Ashton as a victim of circumstance and conspiracy. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Ethan and Evelyn spent those 72 hours in agony, unable to eat, barely sleeping. They walked the streets of Denver, sat in parks, tried to distract themselves with conversation. But always the same question hung over them. What would the jury decide? On the 3rd day, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courthouse was packed. People lined up hours early to get seats. Ethan and Evelyn arrived to find the gallery already full, but Julia Reeves had saved them spots near the front. Whatever happens, Reeves said quietly, you did everything you could, both of you. No matter what that jury says, you told the truth. The jury filed in. 12 men, all serious-faced, none meeting Ashton's eyes. That was a good sign, Ethan thought. Guilty juries couldn't look at the defendant. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find? Guilty. The word hit like a physical blow. Evelyn gasped. Ethan felt his breath catch. Around them, the gallery erupted in noise, cheers, shouts, one woman sobbing. On the charge of bribery of public officials, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. Each count, the same verdict. Guilty. 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 14 counts in total. 14 guilty verdicts. By the time the foreman finished, Ashton sat white-faced at the defense table, his lawyers already preparing appeals. But none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that 12 ordinary people had looked at the evidence, listened to the testimony, and decided that wealth and power didn't place someone above the law. Justice, for once, had won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Cameras flashed. Questions came from every direction. How did they feel? What would they do next? Did they have a message for other whistleblowers? Evelyn handled it with surprising grace. "This verdict isn't about me," she said. "It's about Margaret and all the others who didn't live to see this day. It's about proving that no one is too powerful to face consequences for their crimes. And it's about giving hope to anyone else who's watching corruption and wondering if speaking up makes a difference. It does. It always does." "And you, Mr. Crow?" a reporter called. "What's next for the mountain man who helped bring down Lawrence Ashton?" Ethan looked at Evelyn, saw her watching him with those clear blue eyes. Thought about the cabin in the mountains, empty now, probably overtaken by animals and weather. Thought about the man he'd been when he lived there, isolated, angry, afraid of connection. That man was gone. Had died somewhere between pulling Evelyn from that snowdrift and watching her stand up in court to demand justice. "What's next?" Ethan said slowly, "is figuring out how to live in the world again, how to be part of something bigger than just survival." They left Denver 3 days later, after Ashton's sentencing hearing. The judge gave him 25 years in territorial prison, with no possibility of parole. At 62 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. Ashton was let out in chains, his empire crumbling around him. Shareholders were abandoning his companies. Politicians were denying they'd ever supported him. The newspapers that had once praised his business acumen now competed to publish the most damning exposés of his crimes. "It's not enough," Evelyn said as they watched him disappear into the prison wagon. 25 years doesn't bring back the dead." "No, but it's something. It's more than most men like him ever face." They decided to head west, to California, where Thomas Burke had connections with reform-minded newspapers. Burke himself had survived Ashton's wrath, though his printing press had been mysteriously destroyed in a fire 2 weeks into the trial. But he was already rebuilding, already planning new investigations into other corrupt enterprises. "You'll always have work if you want it," Burke told Evelyn before they left. "Smart investigators who understand how these corporations operate. They're rare. You could make a real difference." "I intend to." The journey to California took 3 weeks on horseback, following trails that wound through deserts and over mountains. It was slow going, but neither of them was in a hurry. They camped under stars, cooked over open fires, talked late into the night about everything and nothing. "Are you going to miss it?" Evelyn asked one evening as they sat watching the sun set over Red Rock canyons. "The solitude? The mountains?" "Sometimes, probably, but not enough to go back to it." "What changed?" Ethan considered the question. "I used to think being alone meant being safe, that if I didn't care about anyone, I couldn't be hurt. But that's not safety, that's just slowly dying. Real safety is knowing someone has your back, knowing you matter to someone beyond just being another body taking up space." "You matter to me. You know that, right?" "Yeah, I know. Same here." Evelyn moved closer, fitting herself against his side. "I was thinking, when we get to California, when I start working with Burke's contacts, it's going to be dangerous. More men like Ashton aren't going to appreciate being investigated. There might be more hunters, more fights." "I know." "And you're still willing to do this? To put yourself at risk for my crusade?" "It's not just your crusade anymore, and yeah, I'm willing. Someone's got to watch your back. Might as well be me." She kissed him then, long and deep, tasting of trail dust and coffee and something that felt like home. They reached San Francisco in late August, just as summer was turning toward fall. The city was massive, sprawling, nothing like Denver. The bay sparkled in the sunlight, and ships from around the world crowded the docks. Burke's contact was a woman named Catherine Morse, editor of the Pacific Reform Journal. She met them in a cluttered office that smelled of ink and tobacco, papers stacked everywhere, the constant clatter of printing presses from the floor below. "Evelyn Hart," Catherine said, shaking hands. "I've read about you. You've got nerve, I'll give you that." "Thank you, I think. It's a compliment. Nerve is what's needed if you're going to do this work." Catherine turned to Ethan. "And you're the mountain man, the one who killed 4 bounty hunters and fought off Ashton's army. It wasn't an army, just hired guns. Still impressive. Can you shoot as well as the papers claim?" "Better?" Catherine laughed. "Good. You'll need those skills. The industries out here, railroads, mining companies, lumber barons, they're every bit as corrupt as Ashton's empire, and they play rough when threatened." Over the following weeks, they settled into a new rhythm. Evelyn worked with Catherine, learning investigative journalism, tracking down leads on corporate malfeasance. Ethan provided security and occasional muscle when interviews turned confrontational. They rented a small apartment in the Mission District, modest but comfortable, a space that was theirs. It wasn't easy work. The companies they investigated fought back, threatening lawsuits, attempting bribes, occasionally sending thugs to discourage them. But Evelyn was relentless, and Ethan had learned that protecting the people he cared about was worth any risk. "You know what I realized?" Evelyn said one night, 6 months after they'd arrived in California. They were on their balcony, watching fog roll in from the bay, wrapping the city in white. "Margaret would have liked this, the work we're doing. She always wanted to make a difference, to help people. I think she'd approve." "Yeah, she would." "Do you ever think about them, the people we couldn't save, the ones who died before we could stop Ashton?" "All the time. But I also think about the ones we did save. The homesteaders who didn't get massacred because we exposed the plot. The workers who won't die in preventable mine accidents now that Ashton's companies are under federal oversight. We can't bring back the dead, but we can honor them by preventing more deaths." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's what keeps me going, knowing that every investigation might save lives. Every corrupt official we expose is one less person with the power to destroy others." A year passed, then 2. They uncovered a scheme by shipping companies to defraud immigrant workers, exposed a lumber baron who'd been bribing inspectors to ignore safety violations that had killed dozens, investigated a factory where children worked 16-hour days in conditions that amounted to slavery. Each investigation brought threats. Each article published brought retaliation. But they kept going, kept fighting, kept exposing the rot beneath the surface of legitimate business. And slowly things began to change. Laws were passed protecting workers. Oversight committees were established. Corrupt officials were prosecuted. Not everywhere, not completely, but enough to matter. Enough to prove that the fight was worth it. Ethan watched Evelyn transform during those years. She became a force in reform journalism, respected and feared in equal measure. Her name on an article meant trouble for whoever was being investigated. She was relentless, brilliant, unwilling to back down no matter the pressure. But she was also still the woman who'd fought beside him in the mountains. Still the person who woke from nightmares about Margaret, who second-guessed her decisions, who needed reassurance that what they were doing mattered. "Am I making a difference?" she asked one night, after a particularly brutal day when their office had been vandalized and threatening letters had arrived by the dozen. "Yes, more than you know." "How can you be sure?" "Because people are scared of you, the right people, the ones who've been getting away with terrible things for too long. You're making them face consequences, and they hate you for it. That's how I know you're making a difference." As for Ethan, he'd found something he'd never expected, purpose beyond survival, helping Evelyn, protecting her, supporting her work. It gave him a reason to get up every morning, made him feel like the years he'd spent hiding in the mountains hadn't been wasted, because they'd led him to this. 3 years after leaving Denver, they got married. It was a small ceremony, just a handful of friends, Catherine Morse, Thomas Burke, who'd traveled from Denver, Father Michael who'd hidden them in his church. They exchanged vows in a garden overlooking the bay, promising to stand by each other through whatever came next. "I never thought I'd do this," Ethan admitted that night. "Get married, build a life with someone. Figured I'd die alone on that mountain." "Are you sorry you didn't?" "Not even a little bit." Evelyn smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Good, because I'm not letting you go. You're stuck with me, mountain man." Could think of worse fates? More years passed. Their work continued. The threats never stopped completely, but they learned to live with the danger, to take precautions without letting fear control them. They heard occasional news about Lawrence Ashton. He died in prison after 7 years, his health broken by the harsh conditions. Some people celebrated. Evelyn just felt numb. "I thought I'd feel vindicated," she told Ethan, "knowing he died behind bars, but mostly I just feel tired." That's because revenge doesn't fix anything. It doesn't bring back the people he killed or undo the damage he caused. Then what's the point? Why did we do all this? Because it stopped him from hurting anyone else. Because it showed other people in power that there are consequences. Because someone had to stand up, and you did. Ethan took her hand. The point isn't revenge, it's justice. And sometimes justice is just making sure the bad guys don't win. 5 years after the trial, They received a letter from a woman named Sarah. She was Margaret's younger sister, whom Evelyn hadn't known existed. Sarah had been living in Ohio when Margaret died, estranged from their family. She'd only learned about Margaret's death and Evelyn's role in exposing it when she'd read about the trial in the newspapers. The letter thanked Evelyn for not forgetting Margaret, for fighting for her even when no one else would. It ended with a simple line, "You gave her death meaning, thank you for that." Evelyn cried when she read it. "I wish I could have done more. Wish I could have saved her." "You did save her," Ethan said. "Not her life, but her memory. You made sure she wasn't just another dead girl whose story never got told. That matters." "Does it? Will any of this matter in 50 years? 100? I don't know. But I know it matters now. To Sarah. To all the people whose lives we've changed. That has to be enough." Evelyn nodded, wiping her eyes. "You're right. It has to be enough." 10 years after pulling Evelyn from that snowdrift, Ethan and Evelyn stood on a hillside outside San Francisco, watching the sun set over the Pacific. They'd grown older. Ethan's hair was more gray than brown now, and Evelyn had lines around her eyes that hadn't been there in Denver. But they were still fighting, still investigating corruption, still exposing the powerful people who thought themselves untouchable. The work was harder than it had been, the victories smaller, the setbacks more frequent. But they kept going. "Do you ever think about the cabin?" Evelyn asked. "Wonder if it's still standing." "Sometimes. Probably fell apart by now. Weather and animals would have destroyed it. We could go back, see what's left, maybe rebuild." Ethan considered it. The idea had a certain appeal, returning to the mountains, seeing how the place had changed in their absence. But he knew they wouldn't stay. That part of his life was over. "Maybe someday, but not yet. We've still got work to do here." "Always more work. Doesn't it ever feel futile, like we're trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon?" "Yeah, sometimes. But then I think about Margaret and all the others. Think about the people we've helped, the lives we've changed. It's not futile if it matters to even one person." Evelyn leaned against him, solid and warm and alive. "I'm glad you pulled me out of that snowdrift." "Me too. Even though I ruined your peaceful isolation and dragged you into a decade of fighting corruption? Especially because of that. Turns out peace isn't worth much if you're not sharing it with anyone." They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep red. Somewhere in the city behind them, there was corruption to investigate, powerful people to challenge, wrongs to expose. The work would never be finished. There would always be another Lawrence Ashton, another empire built on cruelty and greed. But there would also always be people willing to fight back. People who believed that justice mattered, that truth mattered, that standing up to power was worth the risk. People like Evelyn Hart, who'd refused to stay silent even when silence would have been safer. And people like Ethan Crow, who'd learned that the real courage wasn't in hiding from the world, but in engaging with it, in caring about something beyond your own survival. Together, they'd proven that even the most powerful men could be brought down, that ordinary people could make a difference if they were brave enough to try, that justice, while rare and hard-won, was still possible. It wasn't a perfect ending. Their lives weren't easy, the world wasn't fixed, and there were still more battles to fight. But they were fighting them together, and that made all the difference. As darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead, Ethan thought about all the choices that had led him to this moment. The war that had broken him, the isolation that had nearly destroyed him, the frozen woman in a snowdrift who'd given him a reason to live again. Sometimes the worst things that happened to you led to the best things in your life. Sometimes the people you saved ended up saving you right back. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone worth fighting for, worth becoming better for. He'd found that in Evelyn, and she'd found it in him. It wasn't the life either of them had expected, but it was the life they'd built together, choice by choice, fight by fight, day by day. And that, Ethan decided, was more than enough. The mountains would always be there, waiting in the distance. But he didn't need to hide in them anymore. He'd found something better than isolation, something stronger than safety. He'd found purpose, partnership, a reason to face each morning with determination instead of dread. He'd found home, not in a place, but in a person, in the work they did together, in the belief that even small acts of courage could change the world, one exposed crime at a time. As they walked back toward the city, hand in hand, Ethan looked up at the stars and thought about all the people whose struggles had led to this moment. Margaret, who'd died trying to warn innocent families. Whitmore, who'd sacrificed himself to give them a chance. Burke, who'd risked everything to publish the truth. They were gone, but their courage lived on in the work that Evelyn and Ethan continued, in every investigation, every article, every corrupt official brought to justice. That was the real lesson, Ethan thought. That individual lives might be small and brief, but the ripples they created could spread farther than anyone imagined. That standing up mattered, even when, especially when, it seemed futile. Because you never knew who was watching, never knew who'd be inspired by your courage to find their own. Never knew what chain of events might start with one person deciding to do the right thing despite the cost. Evelyn had shown him that, had reminded him that there were things worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. And in doing so, she'd saved him from the slow death of isolation and indifference. Now they'd spend the rest of their lives fighting together. Not because they expected to win every battle, but because fighting was what made life worth living. Because justice, however imperfect, was worth pursuing. Because the alternative, accepting corruption, accepting cruelty, accepting that power always won, was unthinkable. They would keep fighting, keep investigating, keep exposing the truth no matter who it threatened. And maybe, just maybe, they'd make the world a little bit better than they'd found it. That was all anyone could really hope for.